We're all set.
Good to go.
Okay, we'll bring the PAC component of the meeting. First on the agenda would be approval of the minutes of January 18th, 2022.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is passed. First up, we have Portree Jack, rezoning and redesignation Mount Uniac. Final report, John.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's bring the presentation up here. Okay, so this is staff's final report on this application from Portree Jack to redesignate and rezone property from the rural use designation zone to R2. We held a public information meeting back in April 21. Subsequent to that, the applicant did ask to change the rezoning to R1 as opposed to the original R2. So as a result of that, first reading was given again in January 22 and public hearing authorized for this month. So the property is just over 41 hectares or close to 100 acres. It borders the Sackville River here, South Uniac Road, and then a boundary with Halifax Regional Municipality on the bottom here. And there is a strip of zoning. It's all zoned rural use except for the strip along the Sackville River, which is our watercourse greenbelt zone. And the property where it borders HRM, they have a zone similar to our rural use zone they call mixed resource MR1. So that's the zone on the other side of that property. Otherwise, the surrounding zoning is rural use in East Hants. So the purpose is to enable low density subdivision with up to 50 lots, although this concept is just that, it's a concept. So, you know, the applicant hasn't yet dealt with our parks division in terms of open space acquisition. We're also probably considered the fact that there's a fairly large wetland in this area here, so that may impact the number of lots or the road layout. And the Mount Uniac Growth Management Area is unique in that it's our only GMA that allows development that's unserviced. However, the rural use zone does not allow new roads, so that's why this rezoning is being applied for. And we found in general that the application was consistent with your specific policies associated with the Mount Uniac Growth Management Area. I mean, right in the name, the implication is that we want the area to grow, so this rezoning would enable that. And your decision or council's decision in the end will not be appealable because it does involve an amendment to the municipal planning strategy. And the fiscal impact analysis completed by our finance department estimates a net benefit to the municipality of about $60,000 a year once the development is complete. So once you subtract out the cost of maintaining roads and providing solid waste service and everything else that we do, the tax revenue should be about $60,000 higher than that. From reviewing agencies, there really weren't any showstoppers. The RCMP really commented on the road bordering HRM and wondered if, you know, those roads would in the future be extended and what that would mean for accessing the development, given that, you know, that is a hard line in terms of RCMP boundaries. HRM also commented on roads going right to their boundary and indicated that based on the planning on their side of the boundary, they don't anticipate any roads in that area for quite some time. Nova Scotia Public Works commented that they're not going to require a traffic impact study for this. Some issues they may have had with like the actual location of the intersection with the South Uniac Road and drainage, those things get addressed at the subdivision stage. And similarly, East Hants infrastructure and operations, there are no services, as I mentioned, so there were no comments there. They did comment on the road layout, but again, that's something that would get addressed at the subdivision stage. The Sackville Rivers Association did comment on, you know, any development has a potential to harm the river, which is obvious. They also pointed out that there is that large wetland complex on the property, and we're looking for some caution around that. They're also hopeful that the watercourse greenbelt zone portion of the property remains undeveloped, and also hopeful that it comes into public ownership. They have this vision of a future river conservation corridor trail system spanning HRM and East Hants. So that portion of the property is not proposed to be rezoned, so it will stay WG. And whether or not it comes, or some or all of it comes into public ownership, that would be negotiated in the subdivision stage with our Parks Division. And they did comment to that effect on the application. The main issue seemed to be hydrology. So Richard Gagne from Earthwater Concepts was engaged by the applicant to prepare a level 1 groundwater assessment. And in the end, he actually recommends that a level 2 assessment be conducted. But when you read the report, it actually says that he thinks there's enough additional capacity in that recharge area for 500 additional dwellings. So, we're talking about 10% of the potential there. His main concern is really with well interference, which is, I guess, really an issue the way the subdivision is laid out and how close wells are spaced. But I did call him because of that recommendation. But after the conversation with him, I'm pretty comfortable recommending that we not require the level 2 assessment, that there should be, or there's a high probability that there will be adequate quantity and quality of groundwater for those lots. Now, like anyone that lives in a rural area or has drilled a well, moving 100 feet one way or 20 feet another, you can get more or less water. There is that variability that's always there. In terms of citizen engagement, we did the normal advertising, and a public information meeting was held last April. There were 15 participants, and the issues that were raised at that time were the condition of the South Uniacke Road and Bridge, impact of development on property taxes, environmental impact on the Sackville River and wetlands, as well as wells in the area. And then a survey was also mailed out to area property owners within 500 meters, which goes beyond our normal 300 meters, which is a request of council. And we only got 3 responses back, but those 3 responses picked up on similar themes: traffic and safety on the South Uniacke and Eder roads, objecting to the R2 zoning, which would have doubled density. So that's really been taken off the table now that the applicant's only requesting to go to R1 zoning. And he also had a concern, or there was a concern expressed with accessing childcare for school-age children. Obviously, with more people in the area, there'll be more demand for services like that. And also a general concern about the lack of municipal services in that part of Mount Uniacke. Public hearing notices have been mailed to all property owners, again, within 500 meters. And the ads are placed in the February 9th and 16th edition of the Chronicle Herald. And well, of course, we also use our municipal website and social media. So to conclude, we've completed our evaluation and found that the proposal is consistent with your municipal planning strategy and are recommending in favor. And there's our usual chart just showing you where we're at in the process. So the recommendation is that PAC recommend that council give second reading. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, about the police concern for the other side of the municipality in Halifax area. So once we put that road in, probably it would be easier for them to put a road and continue the development over there, because I know to get from Halifax there's a big wetland over there on the other side. So if that happened and somebody, probably the same developer, bought the other land and went through from here, and it was the only access to that. So how policing is going to work on the other side? Who's going to be paying for what, or who's going to be doing the policing over there?
So through you, Mr. Chair. So if that happened and that portion of HRM was only accessible from East Hants, I guess that would have to be worked out between the police divisions. My understanding is it still would fall under the jurisdiction of the RCMP responsible for HRM, so that would be the cycle detachment, I guess. However, the comments I got from HRM planning seem to indicate that they don't, and again, their planning documents are more complicated than ours. They have more than one set. But it sounds like, I don't think anyone can build a subdivision in that area. It's what it sounded like to me, or at least not at the current time. So I don't know that you will see an extension beyond the municipal boundary for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Knockwood.
Yes. Going back to the Saco River, what was the main concern of the harm to the river?
Just that, through you, Mr. Chair, just that if you have development in, close proximity to a water body, there's a potential to do harm. I mean, any construction has to comply with provincial requirements for erosion and sedimentation control. Plus, in this case, we actually have that watercourse greenbelt zone, which is not part of the rezoning. So again, I didn't think there was a huge risk there.
Yeah, I know, like wetlands and all that stuff, see, we refer a lot to the province, and maybe later date, maybe we should talk about wetlands and protection here, sooner or later. No, I have concerns with the environment of the rivers and all that stuff, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone prepared to move the recommendation? Counselor Musa,
I'll move the recommended motion.
you have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Counselor Hebb. Any discussion on the motion? Looking for the question?
Question.
Question?
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. All in favor? And the motion has passed unanimously. Okay, next item, FH Development Agreement Application, request to schedule a public hearing. And Rachel, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to start my presentation. So this is an application from FH Developments for a walkable comprehensive development district. You can see on the zoning map here that the land is zoned R2 as it stands. So we have 3 pieces of land outlined in red, and they just edge on to Ralston Drive down here and Elmwood Drive on the other side. So the land is designated walkable comprehensive development district, which allows for this application to be considered. But as it's zoned R2, it does allow for a subdivision for R2 properties, which is single or 2-unit dwellings as of right. So as it stands right now, they could come in and apply for a subdivision to subdivide their property and build as of right. So there are approximately 31 hectares of land. So this is just an aerial photograph showing the application properties, and these lot numbers may be updated following kind of further discussions with the developer, but we have a mixture of single family, semi-detached townhouses and multi-unit residential. So this map here just shows us what's being proposed, and this has been updated since you saw the original proposed concept. We have a road through extended Elmwood Drive all the way through to Ralston Drive. There's a loop road up here, and then we have some other roads further down, kind of linking in to provide more of a grid pattern. We have 2 areas of multi-unit residential, and I'll go through each of these individually. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. What we're having here, in addition to what would be required as of right, is an ATIS active transportation trail, 3-meter wide asphalt trail, which will link Elmwood Drive all the way through to Ralston Drive and to Highway 214. And that's not required as of right through the subdivision bylaw. All that we require for the subdivision bylaw is for sidewalks on one side of the road. I just wanted to mention as well that this development, I know council has discussed the workforce development plan this morning, so this helps to support that plan. The plan looks for walkability, and we have that through an efficient street network. There's the AT trail, which encourages walkability, shorter blocks, so people can kind of move around the subdivision without having to go too far from intersection to intersection. And we have a great network of connected streets. Also, the workforce development plan talked about streetscape improvements and also affordability of housing. So this provides a mixture of housing over and above what would be permitted as of right, which allows for that kind of mixture and adds to provide some affordability in there. Oh, so also I just wanted to highlight that in this residential R1 area, which is this kind of yellowy color here, we have two areas of frontages, and the Lincoln Elmwood Drive, these ones here that are more of an orange color, is a larger street frontage. So these are bigger lots than what is proposed for the rest of the area. So it kind of provides a nice transition from the R2 properties on Elmwood Drive, linking into these R2 lots, which are the purple colors. So I've just overlaid the concept plan onto the aerial photography so you can see how that sits with the existing neighborhood. And I will focus in a little bit more on the multi-unit property areas of the property further in the presentation. So for the single unit dwelling area, it's highlighted just here in this yellow-orange color. And at this point, we're looking at 119 units and a minimum frontage of 10.36 meters. That's less than the land use bylaw. The land use bylaw requires a 16-meter frontage, but this is consistent with the Clayton Developments application and the Armco Developments application for slightly smaller lots that allow for that variety of types of sizes of units. So we also have an area of 2-unit dwelling area, and it's highlighted by the purple area on the map here, up to approximately 76 lots with a potential for 152 units. And the minimum lot frontage is proposed as per the land use bylaw, which is 80 meter per lot. So we also have an area of townhouses, which are identified here as blue, and they have their back boundary with Highway 102. Each unit will be required to have 2 parking stalls, which is greater than our land use bylaw requires, which would only be 1 parking stall if you have less than 6 units. So that's in addition, that's over and above what the land use bylaw requires. So the multi-unit areas, there are 2 areas of multi-units. One in this area up near Vernon Court, and then there's another one down here, which is near to McKay's Lane. Approximately 345 units. Parking will be required as per the land use bylaw regulations, which requires 1.5 spaces per unit plus a dedicated visitor parking of 1 space per 7 units. Now, what has changed since the original concept was submitted is that then the developer is now asking for up to 6-story buildings. They're originally requesting 4-story buildings, but I will talk about that a little bit more in the rest of the presentation. So you can see here on the presentation slide, we have these this plan here in the bottom left and in the top right. This is what was originally submitted by the applicant as a concept for the multi-unit area, and they have amended that since the original submission. This here is the property that's adjacent to McKay's Lane, which is a private road, and you can see here there's a mixture of apartment buildings, and we have some townhouse units but with apartments above. And then again, this is the other multi-unit area of the property, and we have this is adjacent to Vernon Court on the left of the property, and we have a mixture of apartment buildings and townhouse buildings. So staff are recommending or consider that new questionnaires should be sent out to neighbouring property owners to seek comments on amended plans for the multi-unit sites, as they originally were shown the 4-story buildings. So I think it makes sense to actually ask the community how they feel about the 6-story buildings. However, if the developer decides to pursue a similar concept as the original, then a second questionnaire may not be needed. But at this point, staff are recommending that a second questionnaire be mailed out. So here I've just overlaid the concept onto the aerial photography. And you can see here we have McKay's Lane, And this is an apartment building here. There is a 10-meter non-disturbance area, which you can't see on this map, but it's shown on the overall concept. But the buildings are proposed to be set back 20 meters from that property boundary. And the next one is this one here, that this is the other area of multi-unit, which is adjacent to Burnham Court. And again, we have a non-disturbance area proposed of 10 meters, but the buildings are proposed to be set back in excess of 20 meters. There is an area of wetland just here, so that does limit the actual development being any closer to Vernon Court there. So 2 parks are proposed, and this has changed since the original concept. There was originally a smaller park just down here, if you can see my cursor. This has been moved up, so it's adjacent to Elmwood Drive, and this is a larger area than was originally proposed. So this one is proposed at 8,636 square meters. And then we have another park here, which is proposed at 4,790 square meters. In addition to this, we have negotiated, staff have negotiated a trail that will link through to the old Elmsdale School property, and also an easement that will run from this section of road here all the way down to the edge of the fire department land, which we hope will link through to Highway 2 and will provide a great pedestrian connection through from the development down to Highway 2. So so when we look at this application, we're looking at it on the basis of 10% of the land being provided for open space. So anything that we'll calculate the area of land being proposed, and then anything that's remaining will be open space contribution, either cash, in lieu, working kind, or a combination of both. So one of the issues that staff been working through is a traffic impact study. And the study has been submitted and reviewed by Nova Scotia Public Works, and they have accepted the findings and the recommendations. So there are 2 main recommendations in that study, and they relate to Elmwood Drive and Trunk 2 intersection. And this is the traffic study says that right now that intersection is above capacity based on its current design and needs to be improved to accommodate the existing traffic in that area. But what the traffic study has indicated is once full build out is undertaken on this development, there will be a need for traffic signals. So the province has indicated that they're interested in discussing a cost share agreement with the developer to talk about how those improvements can be brought forward. And then also Highway 214 and Ralston Drive intersection. The development will result in a need for a new eastbound auxiliary right turn lane. So that's turning right as if you're coming from the Sobeys property down Highway 214, there would be a new right turn lane into Ralston Drive. So Ralston Drive is currently owned by Public Works, and it's a gravel road. It serves 4 existing dwellings. If this road is to connect to the proposed developments, the road needs to be upgraded to municipal standards. And staff are currently in the process of discussing the future upgrades and ownership of Ralston Drive with Public Works. So an agreement has been drafted, which is subject to approval by council, whereby the province upgrades the road and builds an active transportation sidewalk. And then the road would then be taken over by the municipality for future maintenance as part of future considerations. So this would mean that from the existing municipal portion of Elmwood Drive, you would have municipal road all the way through to Highway 214, and you wouldn't have kind of any breaks there where it would be owned by the province. So that whole section would be municipally owned. Ralston Drive is 123 meters long, just so you kind of understand the length of that section of road. Stormwater management, the concept plan shows 3 stormwater management areas, and at each subdivision application stage, the developer will be required to submit a stormwater management plan to be prepared by a professional engineer. There are existing stormwater issues in the area, and a recent letter to council last year from residents identified some of the challenges that they're experiencing. So the municipal standards for stormwater management requires that pre and post-development stormwater flows must be balanced through the use of stormwater management ponds, oversized pipes, flow control structures, etc. So that means that the development cannot cause any additional stormwater issues for properties outside of the application property. The municipality does not have a mandate to act to address existing issues as per the storm drainage policy. However, there is some additional stormwater management improvements could be explored further through the storm drainage policy section 6. And that policy section says that municipality may consider issuing credit on wastewater infrastructure charges if stormwater management enhancements for new development proposals can quantify a benefit in reducing infiltration issues for the wastewater system in neighboring developments, which will result in a net benefit to municipal wastewater system as a whole. And this would be a request made by the municipality to a developer. So that just gives some option to have some discussions around potential improvements for existing residents in the area. So staff have undertaken a fiscal impact analysis for this development, and that has been added as Appendix E to the staff report. So based on the current design layout for the development, total annual tax revenue from the development is 1.36 million. And then total annual cost providing services to the proposed development. So that would be maintaining roads, providing RCMP services, providing solid waste collection. That would cost in the region of 886,000. And then once you subtract that from the revenue, you have an annual financial benefit of 479,000. This is just an estimate, and we're just going on what we know at this point. So there are some assumptions made in that calculation, but it does give you an estimate of the potential financial benefit. So also just to kind of highlight one of those points, Elmsdale Fire Department will receive an estimated 156,000 per year from this development. And also I calculated the infrastructure charges, which would be generated by this development, and that's estimated at almost $3 million. So a letter and questionnaire has been mailed to all property owners within 300 meters. We mailed 335 properties, and we received responses from 42 property owners. And a summary of those responses have been provided in the staff report. Although not required by the municipal planning strategy, a public information was held, and staff feel that the community should be given an opportunity to comment on the amendments to the multi-unit residential due to the building height increasing to 6-story. So consider that a questionnaire should be mailed to property owners within 300 meters of the application, unless directed by council not to send that questionnaire out. Planning staff are intended to mail out, so repeating myself there. So if the developer decides to pursue a concept similar to the original for multi-unit, then a second questionnaire may not be necessary. The majority of the comments were raising objections or concerns. There was a small number of responses which offered support, and there were some that were asking questions but did not suggest whether they were in support or objected. So summary, as I noted, has been included in Appendix C. Some of the concerns received includes potential increase in traffic, concern with the impact on existing infrastructure, concern with pedestrian safety, concern with the impact on schools, and concern with the increased stormwater flooding and its impact on areas already struggling with this issue. So to conclude, FH Developments has demonstrated a commitment to the WCDD goal by submitting a proposal that encourages walkability and active transportation. Residential developments proposed to be comprised of varying densities and housing types, and parkland trails and active transportation routes will not only benefit the residents, but will benefit to the wider community. So the land is already zoned R2, which means the developer could build an R2 development as of right, with the same grid network linking Elmwood Drive through to Ralston. This development offers elements which would not be required with an as of right development. The first draft of the development agreement is almost complete, and a final draft will be presented to Planning Advisory Committee with the final staff report. So between now and the final staff report, the development agreement will be completed and reviewed thoroughly, including by the municipal lawyer. Staff is bringing this report to request approval to schedule a public hearing when ready, and also to explain why staff consider a second questionnaire should be mailed out. And a full analysis will be presented to PAC and council with the final staff report. And you can see there, we're still under evaluation of the application. We have sent questionnaires out, and we've sent requests to internal departments and external agencies requesting their comments. And the recommendation is that staff be authorized to schedule a public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Anybody have any questions or comments for Rachel? Councillor Mitchell, Deputy Warden Mitchell, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to staff. From what I hear is that it's possible that the drainage issues that affect Pine Hill and Elmwood could be somewhat addressed with this new development. Am I hearing correctly?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, we are looking at that, and we have had some discussions with the developer around that. We can't quantify what improvements may be had, but this is kind of a discussion that we're into with the developer, and there is a potential for some improvements there. I don't know if Jesse has anything else he wants to add to that discussion.
Certainly. So the developer has two viable options for their stormwater plan. One is within regulations that essentially balances pre and post flow. The other option would be they've got another option that upsizes some of their stormwater infrastructure and then has it release slowly over time. It's upsizing the storm pipes and managing it similar to a stormwater pond. It's just under the ground in certain areas. To enable that, we would have to enter into a negotiation with the developer to leverage the storm drainage policy, because there would be benefits to the overall sewer department, sewer infrastructure, because we wouldn't be overwhelmed at our standpipes on private property that gets flooded and then inundates the sewer system. So that's section 6 of the storm drainage policy. That would be a choice of council entering into a negotiation to leverage said policy if that were an avenue. So they have two options. One balances pre and post flow, so does not make anything worse. And the other one would be a choice of the municipality to negotiate. And it would be, the difference would be we would use infrastructure charges. So we'd give them credit towards infrastructure charges to make those modifications and validate them if we went down that path. And as Rachel mentioned, we've seen the options. There's not an exact quantification, but the rationale explained by their designer is sound in that it would mitigate to the betterment of the adjacent subdivision.
What's in place to control traffic speed along the new extension through Elmwood? It looks like a fairly straight or fairly unencumbered roadway. Is
So,
there
through you,
plans
Mr.
in
Chair.
place?
Sorry, so through you, Mr. Chair, we're talking about this section of Elmwood Drive through the development. The development agreement does have some text in it to say that the developer will submit a design for traffic calming along that stretch of road, and to build out that infrastructure when the roadway is built. So there is some text in the draft development agreement to address that.
Would they be starting on the Ralston Drive end or the Elmwood end?
So it would be dealing with this section here of the road that the developers proposed. We don't know what that looks like yet. The developer would need to design that in, but we have drafted in that they would need to address that in their design.
My question, if they start construction, would they start on the Ralston end?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Or the
Right.
Elmwood end and work the other way?
Right, so
Sorry.
I misunderstood you. So the
Okay.
phasing phase 1A is this area. Can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yes,
Okay, so phase 1A is this section here, which is the R2 section. Phase 1B covers a part of the single unit dwelling area. So essentially they would start at Ralston Drive and work their way this way. Phase 2 is the townhouse units out back, and phase 3 would be when they would link through to Elmwood Drive.
okay. You were showing two connections, one to the Elmsdale School and one to Highway 2. Does the one coming out to Highway 2 come along the Elmsdale Fire Department property?
We're talking about this connection down here.
Yes,
So,
the active transportation hookup?
so yes, there's a proposal for an easement down along through the multi-unit. Where this crosses over, this is the fire department property here. Where that crosses over onto the fire department property has not been established yet. But the intent would be that we would cross over and the trail would link down to Highway 2.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with a project this mammoth in size, I do have some questions. Can you just walk me through it again? What is permitted in this zone right now, the current zoning?
Right, so as of now, the developer could build a single or 2-unit dwellings. It's zoned R2, which allows for either single or 2 units. So they could build some semi-detached or duplexes, or they could build single units. But they would have to meet the subdivision bylaw in terms of, the road network. But essentially they could link Ralston Drive all the way through to Elmwood Drive and build single or 2-unit dwellings throughout the property.
Kind of in keeping with what's there now. Now, when you mentioned, so they are applying for, originally this application was applying for 4-story multi-unit complexes, but since then they've changed it to 6-story. Is that correct?
Yes, we received some amended plans just over a week ago, which shows 6-story buildings. Staff haven't had a chance to kind of review those in detail and give any feedback to the developer, but essentially, yes, it's moving from what was originally 4-story through to 6-story. And the 6-story they're proposing to be comprised of 1-story at ground parking with 5 stories of residential above. But in those multi-unit areas, there are also some townhouse type units. So they won't be 6-story. There'll be a mixture of regular apartment buildings with some townhouse style developments.
Right. So the apartment buildings that currently at 4-story height, they would have 345 units in them. So I'm assuming that if they were approved at the 6-story height, they'd have even more than 345 units in them.
No, actually, the numbers are about the same. I don't have the final number in front of me, but when I had the numbers back from the developer, they were very similar. I think what they've done is they've just distributed those units through the property differently than they were before.
Okay. As well, when you mentioned that staff is considering sending out another letter, is that because they've raised the application from 4 stories to 6 stories?
Yes, it just made sense to us that the community would want to have the ability to comment on that.
Okay, so I guess with the development, the way it's being presented right now, assuming that, let's make the assumption that people have 2 vehicles per unit, just with the expense of them and whatnot, that would be a potential for 1,300 more vehicles going in and out of the subdivision at either entrance. As well, when you say that Public Works is considering paving the entrance into Ralston, I'm assuming that they're only doing that in the event that that this development goes through. They're not just doing it just to get Ralston paved, I guess.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think whatever happens with this property, that road would need to be upgraded. Right now, it's a gravel road, so even if this comes through as a right subdivision, we would see that Ralston Drive would need to be upgraded to accommodate the additional traffic from whether it be as of right or whether it be through this application.
I see. And just another thing, you talk about traffic calming issues. Is that something that a developer would work with Public Works to see what was permitted there or what was okay through Public Works? They don't just decide what traffic calming issues they're going to be putting in on their own, right?
So the consultant, if we're talking about the intersection improvements on Ralston and Elmwood Drive with Ralston and Highway 214 and Highway 2 with Elmwood Drive, the consultants employ a traffic engineer to prepare that study, and they submit a recommendation based on what they find in that study, and then the Public Works will review that and decide if they think that that makes sense based on the results of that study. And they have determined that they agree with the recommendations that were made in that study. So they are in agreement with the proposed intersection improvements.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that I am kind of happy to see with this development is that in a lot of developments we've had going through the corridor, we've received multiple times feedback from the public saying they wish the multi-unit buildings backed onto Highway 2. And this one actually does have multi-unit buildings backing onto Highway 2, not onto the 214 or Highway onto the 102, not on the Highway 2 or the 214. I am a little concerned that we are going to put this towards a public hearing as the next step in the process, but we still have surveys going out to get information back on the change of height. So to me, it would make more sense to have that information come back, staff do an evaluation, and us to be at the same point at a staff evaluation, determining of the feedback from the height conversation, just like we would at this point from the feedback from a public information meeting and the initial surveys. That to me is, I don't want to put the cart before the horse. And with the recent developments that have happened through most of the multi-unit developments that have been happening throughout the corridor area, and this moving from a 4-story, I imagine it was wooden structure, originally 4-story, which could have been 5-story via concrete, based on our height bylaw. The appetite for the public might already be well known. I'm not going to put words in their mouth because they have the right to speak and respond back, but the developer changing it at this point, was there any justification or any feedback as to why they would go beyond the standard height bylaws from their initial proposal?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have information on the reasoning behind the developer wanting to change the height. I mean, the developer understands the market and what he feels would kind of make sense for what's needed in this area. I don't know their logic behind why they want to propose up to 6-story, but in this zone, this designation WCDD, there is no upper height limit. That's really just a negotiation between council and the developer. So there is no height limits, but council have established in other developments that 6-story is, Armco and Clayton have some ability to build 6-story units. So there is some precedent there in regards to what height of buildings have been looked at through other areas of the municipality.
I understand that, but the only increasing to 6 stories has to be through development agreement only. We have a height bylaw for residential building structures, and even in the WCDD and along the highway commercial, you require so much commercial space in the bottom in order to go up to a certain height. Am I not correct underneath Or have I missed something in the last number of developments that we've gone to, and we've talked about going from 4 to 6 stories of having to be through development agreement because as of right, it's not permitted.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, in the mixed use centre zone, if you want to go above a certain height, it's through development agreement, which was the same for the Curly's property that council recently looked at. But each zone has its own height limits and deals with it differently. That was how the mixed use centre zone dealt with it. In this WCDD zone, there are no limits on height. So in terms of residential developments, there is no residential height limit for this zone, but other zones deals with it slightly differently.
Okay, so in this zone, in this type of WCDD, you could build a 15-story apartment building as of right.
No, that's sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, that's really a negotiation from council. If council decide that 6 stories is the highest they want to go, that would be written into the development agreement so that the developer can't go any higher than that. It's really a decision for what council feel is appropriate for this area. And that's really the WCDD is all really negotiation as to what's appropriate for this property. So we look at what's in the surrounding area and what other zones allows. But if council feel that 6 stories is too high, then they can limit that to a different height if that's appropriate.
Okay, because this raises a concern for me is that we have building requirements and building standards for all of our zones, whether it's R1, R2, mixed use. But what I'm hearing now in WCD, there is no building standards. It's all through negotiation and all through consultation.
That's right. So that really allows council to negotiate with the developer, and the WCDD doesn't have zone limits. It's all through negotiation through a development agreement. But the development agreement will act like a land use bylaw in that it will set limits, upper limits for height. It will set limits, minimum lot standards, and all of those things that are included in a land use bylaw will be included in the development agreement. So it's just kind of like its own mini land use bylaw in terms of the way it functions.
Okay, no, thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that, because that basically means in this zoning, it's completely to discretion of council how high and what these buildings will look like in negotiation with the developer. So we don't, we're not getting into as of right and this and that. So that's all I have for now. I do have some concerns with the height changing, and I know this developer has been around and has seen what has happened. So I'll be interested to see what happens with the survey results back from the residents. But again, pushing this towards a public hearing without having that information beforehand, that would have at the evaluation point, does concern me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Warden Ralston.
Thank you. Following up on Councillor Perry's comments, just like to clarify for myself, WCDD is not a zone. Is that correct? This is zoned R2. R2 is the zone. So as of right there, you're not going to get any more than what, 2 stories?
That's correct, yes.
So WCDD is a designation which allows you to do different things in the zone than what the zone allows, correct?
Yes, in this case, there are some properties which are zoned and designated WCDD, but on this property, the zone is R2 and it's designated WCDD.
Okay, I find that confusing. And if I find it confusing, I'm pretty darn sure the public finds it confusing. The R1 properties, those are very narrow, small lots, are they not?
They're smaller than what's allowed in what's required in the land use bylaw, but they're consistent with what the Clayton and the Armco developments they have been allowed through in those 2 properties. And staff looked at when we looked at the Clayton and the Armco one, we looked quite carefully at what was felt to be workable in terms of not being too small, but allowing for those smaller single lot properties. So staff are comfortable with that smaller frontage, but it is less than the land use bylaw. And also, just to highlight that the developer is intending to build larger frontages along the Elmwood Drive section. The smaller frontages will be further into the development, and we'll have some up here, but the majority that would be along Elmwood Drive would be those slightly larger than the 10.36 meters.
Well, that kind of concerns me because you're shoehorning houses in there right on top of one another without, and I know there's a couple of parks proposed, but there's not much space for a kid to get outdoors and do anything at all. But hey. So, and if there was not a development agreement, and if the developer developed as of right, there would be no apartment buildings, and all the lots would have to meet the land use bylaw, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I guess another part of my concern is the parking, with shoehorning all these single family dwellings in there, and whether there's even room for 2 vehicles in one of those driveways or not, because I know we don't require it. I still think we should, but we don't. Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of interested, I guess, in what the community has to say about it. And I guess by going as of right, you would lose your, possible traffic calming and things like that you can require in a development agreement. What about lights at the intersections specifically? Is that something that could be required, or has that been discussed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the traffic study didn't show a need for lights at the Ralston Drive intersection, but down on Elmwood Drive, the traffic does show that when the development is built out, that there will be a need for traffic lights down there. So currently in discussion with Public Works as to what point they feel that needs to be completed, but the traffic study has shown a need for traffic lights if the development proceeds as planned.
Well, personally, I think it's poor planning to not plan to put traffic lights in places until it's overwhelmed and it's absolutely needed. Just put that out there. Sometimes being proactive would be better. And as someone who has sat trying to exit the Royal Bank onto the 214 many times, it's not easy. And so I don't suspect exiting from Ralston Drive would be any easier. But just my comments, I do concur with Councillor Perry. I'd really like to see what the community feels about those 6-story buildings. I just would be more comfortable having that information before I went to a public hearing. Thank you.
Your Warden, Councillor Hibb.
You got me down? Hopefully.
Yep.
You're good.
You're muted, Councillor Hibb. That or you're a ventriloquist.
A lot of people want to mute me. Looked this proposal over pretty close, and there's a number of issues there that concern me. It seems that these developers see a piece of land, they come in and they either buy it or gonna buy it, and they check with their engineers and they say, how many residents can we jam into this project? And they just keep going from, used to be 4 stories, now they want 6 stories. And municipality has a bylaw of a lot size, and we're lowering that to allow them to put more houses in. And the policy is there for that. And Councillor Warden Rolls is right about 2 cars and stuff there. It's not that everyone will, but they will. Ralston Avenue, and I think Reginald, you stated that traffic coming from Sobeys, there will be a right-hand lane to turn into Ralston Avenue. Well, to me, that's redundant. Why would you need a right-hand lane to turn in? Because you're coming down that way anyway to turn in. It would seem to me that if you're coming from the Elmsdale Square up, you would need a left-hand turn to turn in because of the traffic there. Public Works totally amazes me when they do a traffic study. Down there at Elmwood right there now, I mean, there should have been traffic lights put there years ago. And to say that there's really no need for it right now, but when this development agreement, if it goes, they're probably going to be a need for it. Well, that's totally ridiculous. And I think that should be something that Public Works should be working on right now. And there's a number of streets in number 2 that should be doing that too. One of the good things about it is that if this goes through, the Pine Hill and Elmwood water problems may be mitigated to some extent, only if it goes through. And is this development appealable to Ridgel?
Through Mr. Chair, yes, it would be appealable.
It would be appealable. Okay. Well, you know, in these developments, the developer looks at his project and that's it. How can we get it through? And you know, the public, this has been brought to us many times. Can the schools support 600 plus more homes? Our medical center, we haven't even got enough doctors now. Fire department, can it handle another 600 residents? The police, same thing. And the traffic study, there's already a traffic problem there now. And if they build that subdivision over and across the river in HRM at Mobile Home Park, what it is, my gosh, the traffic is going to be unreal, and it's unreal there now. And personally, if you look at that map and you've got your 6-story buildings coming down by McKees's Lane, and you've also got another 6-story buildings going up on the by the 102. It seems to me, why are they putting 6-story buildings down by McKees's Lane? Why don't they put them all up by the 102 and change that around so that they're not in the back of somebody else's property? And with them at the 102, I mean, they always said they want to put them close to a road that they don't have to travel through a subdivision. Well, if you put them up by the 102, refigure your road area there so they come out Ralston Drive. They don't have to travel everywhere. The other issue I have is traffic going through from Elmwood out through the Ralston Avenue. You know, be it through traffic for them. If they want to go to Sobeys or somewhere, they're not going to go down to number 2. They're going to zip through there. So there's a whole lot of issues there that really does not sit with me. And I think keeping the properties all R2 and letting them build it as a right is the way that I would be looking at it. Thank you.
Councillor. Deputy Warden Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Getting back to what everybody's been saying. Rachel, what is the build-out time from start to complete finish? Any idea?
The developer has suggested, has requested up to 10 years, but based on the current market, they don't feel that it will be, well, they feel that it'll be quicker than 10 years. But 10 years is what seems reasonable to include in the development agreement to set that timeline out.
One thing residents have been asking for the last number of years is a second exit, which this would provide, but it's only going to provide that second exit at the end of the build out. Am I correct? When they connect up to Elmwood?
That's right. Yeah.
So it could be 9 years and the 10th year that they would have their second exit. And I thought there was something in place that you couldn't do any more development in that area until you had the second exit. Did I hear that right years ago?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is something in our subdivision bylaw that talks about no more than 100 lots off an existing, off one road. So right now, Elmwood Drive just has the one exit onto Highway 2. So as Councillor has mentioned, this would provide that additional exit, which which would allow for emergency services and all of those benefits of allowing, enabling more than one exit through a development.
So building from the Ralston Drive in doesn't have to satisfy that condition, and because it wouldn't be hooking up to Elmwood Drive.
Well, the subdivision bylaw requires no more than 100 lots, but the development agreement, and actually just in talking to that, this is all phase 1A of the development, so there will actually be more than one entrance and exit from the developments, as we have Pine Hill Drive just here. So the people in the new community would be able to use both Ralston and Pine Hill Drive, but it wouldn't benefit Elmwood Drive until later in, because right now I believe there's around 300 odd units in Elmwood Drive. So this would provide Elmwood Drive residents with an additional option for exiting the subdivision.
Last question. If the zoning stays at R2, what happens to the active transportation part? Would that continue, or would something else have to be done?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that wouldn't, well, the developer only has to provide the sidewalk. So the AT trail wouldn't be required through the subdivision bylaw. This easement down here, down to Highway 2, would also not be required through the subdivision bylaw. And we have this walkway here. These are all things that we have negotiated with the developer. The developer is only required to build one sidewalk, well, a sidewalk on each road. So there is that additional ability to have that active transportation that wouldn't be provided through as of right development.
And you say this is appealable?
It is, yes.
Okay, I'll wait to hear what the residents are going to say with the additional 2 stories, but the second exit was a big thing that they wanted, and to improve the drainage in Pine Hill and Elmsdale had some people excited, but there are still some things that have to be addressed going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to the single unit dwellings, that's 10.36 meters per each single unit dwelling. And for the R2 section, it would be 18.
It would be 18 per lot, which would be 9 meters per dwelling if that was subdivided. So if you have a semi and they remained on one property, it'd be 18 meter per lot. But if you subdivided down the middle, it would be 9 meters per unit.
Okay, so basically it's the same space as if it was an R2 unit. It's actually a little bit bigger by about a meter, but it's smaller than what the normal R1 unit would be. Because the warden brought that up, and I looked at that section, and I'm basically saying those are basically detached townhouses side by side is what they are, with lots like that. But you see those type of lots coming up, unfortunately, a lot more places. The biggest concern I would have, especially when it comes to small and undersized lots like that, is snow. I was up through Larry UTEC the other day, and you look, there's not enough room for them to clear the snow out of the driveway. There's no space to put it between each thing. So there's snow removal would be a concern about coming in this area. But like the deputy warden said, I really think before any decision can be made, we need to hear from the public on what they think. There are some good points, the possible improvements to the storm drainage, the second exits. I would hope that, if I understand you correct, in phase 1A, it's linking into Ralston and Pine Hill. Is that the first phase, correct?
Yes, correct.
So those 2 exits would be there, and the final phase is linking into Elmwood.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so at least you have the dual part and then linking in. But yeah, it comes down to me is I want to hear from the residents. There are lots of elements of this development that I think are very positive for the community. The sidewalks, the active transportation trail, the enlarged parks are definitely going to be a community benefit. What they will look like at the end, the Parks Department will obviously talk with the community and figure out whether it's going to be sports fields or whatever. But there are definitely some concerns as well. So I will wait and hear from the community before going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Rhino, I have you down, Warden. Councillor Rhino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. So this total, just to clear my facts, so this total land mass that we're talking about is now currently R2.
That's correct, yes.
All right, good. So what would be once this is totally complete, what's the total number of units?
It's around 660.
660. You know, Councillor Hibb hit it right on the nail, right on the head. Developers, you know, are all they want is, it seems to be, number one is maximize the number of units that can go on a property, and I can see that. You know, that's just the way it is. They want to maximize their profits. I understand that. But I think really creating communities is far down the road from that. And where I see it, the only two positives right now that I can take from it is connectivity with Elmwood and another exit there, and possibly helping out the flooding conditions on Pine Hill and so on and so forth. But really, this is going to have a great impact on the people of Elmsdale. I mean, that's substantial. You talk about appealable. So if a decision was made to stay the way it is, R2, and we base that on, let's say, for the greater good of the community itself, how successful would we be defending that if it came down to it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's really hard to say, but I would say the starting point would be that this is designated WCDD. So the policies in your municipal plan strategy already sets out that council are willing to negotiate a different form of development than what is permitted as of right on this site. But it's hard to say in terms of, how defendable that would be. I think that's an important part of it, though, is that this is designated WCDD, and so therefore the policies are encouraging this type of development.
So it sounds like we may not have a great amount of success heading down a road if it was appealable.
John, do you have anything else to add to that in terms of?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair. I think the councillor understands it. It's, if you make a decision that's not consistent with your own policy, then you're vulnerable at the board. And the policy does, as Rachel said, encourage developers to mix up types of housing. So it's why the designation was created, to allow this kind of. And I would also say that. I don't think we should look at it as a bad thing that we have small lot singles. Not everyone can afford a large lot single. And this development also has a really nice mix of housing. You have the higher density stuff, you have the townhouses, large lot single, small lot, and 2-unit dwellings. That's generally how you create complete communities, by having a mix and range of housing for people at different stages of their life and at different income levels. That's the whole point of doing that. But in terms of the appealability, yeah, it's you would, if you just decided that you didn't like it and you turned it down, then I think you would be vulnerable.
Well, I really don't like being held hostage by our own policies. And maybe we should start, with the recent development requests that have come across our board, maybe it's time we review a few of these policies to better fit an area. It just irks me that we can be held hostage pretty well by that. I would be interested to see, to hear what the people of Elmsdale, because this, like Councillor Ebb said, this is going to be having an effect on schools, fire departments, the greater community in general. And I'm just total in wonderment of this and all the pressures it's going to create too. So I'd be interested to hear what the people of Elmsdale feel about this. Thank you.
Councillor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in agreement with so many things that have just been said here. My concern is that as I go further down this road, what I'm seeing is developers coming in. They are promising that if you agree to this elaborate community changing development, we're going to get you a set of lights, which they've desperately needed in Elmwood for years. You know, we're going to get you another exit. We're going to get you, you know, green space and this and that. But at what cost to them? These developments, a development like this, you know, it's a shame that yes, they might get increased drainage or improved drainage if they agree to 6-story apartment buildings. And I'm not saying that they are all going to be opposed to this, but you know, these little lots, we set the size of these lots to what we deem appropriate for building a single dwelling on, and then they want to make them meters smaller. And it's like there's no respect for what we've set up as being appropriate. I just feel like this, we're coming to this over and over again with the same issues, and you know, bribing or hoping that they can get people to agree by promising them things that they're not going to get otherwise. I just think it's shameful. And also the other thing is that the stress and what it causes to residents, even proposals that don't even get approved, but what residents go through when something like this is proposed, you know, we have to consider that as well. This business about not being, you know, that it's appealable and that we really have no, so I have to ask this question, and maybe John, you can answer this. So if we said, we think that it's more appropriate for it to continue on as the R2 and they could develop it out that way. So that's appealable, which means that our own policy is forcing us to not be able to say that it can just be. So if it's appealable, what could the outcome of that possibly be? That they get to do whatever they propose?
Through Mr. Chair, yes. I mean, if something goes to the board can set aside council's decision and basically institute the development agreement that was negotiated.
So if we said this should stay as R2 and they appealed that, they could say that, yes, well, this is how you propose, this is what you put in place, which means that there's no negotiating any further. They would just get what they proposed.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, it's a little more complicated than that. I mean, the board will ask the first question, was council's decision reasonably consistent with its own policy? So it's, I mean, if you're being held hostage, you're being held hostage with a policy that you approved. So you, council, approved these CDD policies that we use to negotiate development agreements with developers. And I think they're good policies. I think they allow, as I said, complete communities to be created. And yes, you do get a lower lot standard for some things, but that's not necessarily automatically a bad thing. As I said, it helps improve density, which helps walkability. It helps improve the finances of the development because there's less you know, linear feet of infrastructure to maintain for every dwelling unit for the municipality and to the future. You know, staff wouldn't bring this stuff to you if we thought it was going to be bad for the community. We think this is actually a pretty good development, what we've seen so far. Now, whether or not 6 stories is appropriate, as Rachel said, we haven't really analyzed that part of the development yet, but the general concept of having a range of types of housing in a development, we think is a good thing.
Thank you.
Councillor Warden Ralston.
Thank you. Wow. Well, respectfully, I'm going to disagree with the Director of Planning when it comes to an appeal. We have won some appeals that he didn't think we would win. And in order to win, you have to go in with, I'm going to say, your staff believing in what they're presenting. But I do think that an argument could be made in this particular case that 6-story multi-unit buildings don't fit in with the pre-existing pattern of development there. And I do believe that an argument could be made that going to undersized lots is not a good fit for the pre-existing pattern of development here, and that indeed the undersized lots goes against our own policy and regulation everywhere else. I do believe that the lack of room for snow clearing is a very valid thing to consider. So I think there are arguments to be made. Should it be appealed? I truly do. I've always had a problem with an appointed board, which will consist of 1 or 2 people, can do a review of a democratically elected body's decision around how they want their community to look, can just overturn it with a stroke of a pen. I have issues, always had issues with that, but that's how it is. With regards to the fact that we seem to be finding ourselves hamstrung by our own policies, I do agree. We're kind of in a mini plan review now. I think we have to relook some of those policies, because as someone who was here when those policies were put in place, I'm not sure that I don't know about other counselors, I'm not sure that I understood what positions they might be putting us in. And now I'm seeing it. So for example, I'm thinking, why on earth would we designate anything to be WCDD on land that's zoned R1 or R2? I'm wondering if we should not have anything R2 or less zone or designated WCCD. Maybe that's something we should look at. There are different situations we are finding ourselves in with regards to density. So maybe we have to review our policies and our bylaws and have an ability somehow built in there around density, and that gives us the ability to make the right decisions for the communities that are there. And I hear John when he says this is a good development. And I look at this and I say, yeah, it ticks all the boxes for a planner. It does. And if this was located in a great expanse of an area just starting to be built out, I would even say, yeah, maybe that'll work. I still wouldn't like the undersized lots, and I'd still think you wanted more parking spaces, but I lost the parking space battle. But in the middle of an already developed pre-existing community like Elmsdale, that's different to me than the Clayton or the Armoyan and where they're building. They're almost building communities within community. And I don't see this the same way. So those are my concerns. And I'm just wondering, is there any way we can wait before scheduling a public hearing for this until those surveys go out and we have the results from those new surveys around the 6-story buildings?
Rachel, do you want to?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's a decision of if council decide not to move forward with allowing staff to schedule a public hearing at this stage, then that's their decision. I did want to just highlight that is the regular process for us is well, for dealing with the development agreement application. An application would come in, staff would request initial consideration and request approval to schedule a public hearing. And then we would do the processing of the application, get the questionnaires in, and the next report would be the final report. And I realize this isn't kind of a regular type application, but it is normal process for us to go from the first report to the next report being the final report. But if council decide that they're not ready to allow us to schedule a public hearing at this stage, then we can go out, seek some comments on those questionnaires and come back before seeking approval to schedule that public hearing.
Well, I think right now, and I may not be speaking for all of council, but I suspect I speak for at least some besides myself. I think we're a little bit sensitive right now to what the people who have built the communities that are there now and how they feel about the communities they live in and what they want them to look like going forward. And I think we're a little sensitive now to the fact that they don't always think that we're getting it right. And so I don't, and I'm not disagreeing that there are benefits to this. I don't live there. So for me to say the benefits outweigh the negatives is kind of difficult. I'd like in this particular case to hear back from the public again first, but hey, there are councillors who live much closer to this development that will be affected more than I will. So I will wait to see what, and public members as well. I'll wait and see what those folks have to say. But I did just want to say that I look at this and I see several avenues of defense should we decide to stay R2. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tingley.
I think the warden answered most of the questions that I had, but I'm just kind of wondering, I wasn't on council, obviously, when these areas were designated WCDD. And, maybe we didn't understand what we were doing or the full extent of what could happen in these areas. But, the question is do we want to have a higher density WCDD developments in these areas? My personal feeling, I think people already know, I'm really not that bothered by it, but it does make a difference what the residents there do think. So we do have to hear from them. The concerns about schools, infrastructure and everything, I'm sure that will be worked out as things develop. When I moved here in the 70s, since my family moved here in the 70s, the corridor area has grown by about 9,000 people, and the lots have shrunk, lots of things have changed. And this will be a big change, doing this higher density, walkable, mixed use developments. But I'm just wondering, maybe John can speak, why did we decide to go with these types of developments in this particular area?
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't remember all the back and forth at the time, but there was, I guess it was a large, if you consider all the properties together, it's a large undeveloped area right now. So it's an opportunity to do something a little different than your usual R1 or R2, I guess. And in this case, it is unusual that it's zoned R2 and not zoned CDD. And that was done, I guess, I don't remember the discussions with the individual property owners, but it would have given them more flexibility. So they would have the ability to use the as a right to do an R2 subdivision. Or if they wanted to try and do a more comprehensive development like this, they could apply for a development agreement. So whereas Clayton didn't have that flexibility, it was zone CDD and it was designated CDD. So they couldn't build a single house until they negotiated the development agreement. And this developer has sort of mused with maybe starting the development under the existing R2 zone because he wanted to get going right away. So we talked about that, as opposed to, our preference would be that we consider the entire development as one piece instead of dealing with it partly as a right and then part through a development agreement. I would also say, Mr. Chair, that, after hearing a lot of hesitation today, I think Rachel and I will talk after this, but we'll probably go back to the developer and, before we go back to the public, we may want to rethink that the changes that they're proposing, that, it sounds like the appetite at council is not going to be great for that. So, they'll consider that when, they may decide to go ahead or they may not, but we'll have a chat with them anyway after this.
Okay. Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, Rachel. Like, if you look at Street E, and there's like something like watershed in there or something. What's that? What those down at the bottom next to the?
Oh, yes, I see now. This is are you talking about this area just here, Councillor?
No, on to the left.
The stormwater management area just here.
No,
And then a pumping.
Fill up those like lines. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yes. So there is some wetlands on the property. Some of them, the hatch line here, they're proposed to be infilled. There is also some water courses through the development. Either side of the water courses is shown a buffer, which meets our land use bylaw. And there's a water course through here that shows a buffer either side. So these are kind of the water areas.
Okay. I also have concern about the smaller lots. And my biggest concern is, well, the multi-unit. We refuse so many applications because we don't have a buffer zone, or we don't go from like Mackay's Lane. Is that R1 or R2 or what zone is it?
Through Mr. I'm just going to go back to the zoning map. So McKay's Lane is split zone. So we have some village core down this end. And then up here it's R2. So the area that's closest to the development property is R2.
R2. And on this side too, like what's called Vernon Lane?
Vernon Court. This area, this is all R2 as well. So surrounding the property, the majority is R2, and then we have a small area, well, an area in here which is R1, which is single unit dwellings.
So we have 6-story unit next to an R2, which is like single residential home, and I think we have a good reason to object that, because we did so many times refuse the application because we didn't go gradually from like R2 or something to a 6-story unit. So I don't know. I don't see it fitting in there. I think if they move like, because those people already bought their homes, like knowing that they have single or 2-unit dwelling next to them, but they're gonna be affected by the 6-story high. So as it is, I don't think I'm gonna be able to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. I'm just wondering, in September, we passed a motion to do a review. John, you may remember, was it just for the MU zoning, or was it for our zoning in the corridor zoning in general?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is it's just for the mixed use center zone area, and that's a report that we're working on.
Okay, and that's coming in the
shortly. Yes, I'm hoping that you'll see it in March.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing.
All right, one more question. That's it.
Okay, you're out of order there, doing that there. You're out of order there, Councillor. No, it is. There's people ahead of you. It is Warden Ralston.
You're on mute, Warden.
Thank you. So we're already reviewing one thing because it didn't seem to be working the way we thought it should. I'm going to throw it out there that maybe we should do a more in-depth review and certainly include WCCD on lands that are zoned for lesser, R1, R2 particularly. And I don't know if there's other, are there other things that are going to put us in a similar position that should be reviewed sooner rather than later, before we're faced with an application that just doesn't seem to feel quite right, and we find ourselves in a position of not easily being able to do anything about it. So how much workload would that add, John, to do that WCDD review?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, typically the kind of thing that you would do through a full review, which we're hoping not to do this time, but I just off the top of my head, I don't think there's much more land out there that's zoned CDD with Clayton and Armco and this piece. I don't think there's much more. There might be, I'll check the zoning map here, but yeah, I don't think there's much more to it. But typically, you know, that's a big policy change. It would be normally the kind of thing that you would want to do through a full plan review.
But if we're halfway to a full plan review and the majority of council's not happy with the way what's there is working, would it not be better to bite the bullet and do it now?
It very well could be, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you're going to call off the questions. That's why I raised my hand and talked. So if we get more questionnaires and more opposition, wouldn't that put us in better way to defend an appeal?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we should probably, I would advise, I guess, the committee, we should probably not talk about defense of appeals. We probably went too far there just because it's really a legal matter and you don't want to tip your hand, I guess. So if you really want to have that discussion, we should probably go in camera.
I thought so from the beginning, but I saw other councillors talking about it. So. Thank you.
Councillor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to touch on what Warden Ralston was just talking about, is that something that we should be making a motion for, or something that would just be tacked on to the review that's currently in the works?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think a motion would be in order because I think that other motion is pretty specific to the mixed use center.
Would this one extend the time of getting the other one done by a lot, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, I think they're separate reports. So I would still bring the mixed use center report next month or April at the latest.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rhino.
Yes, I'll agree with the warden and Councillor Cole. I think decisions of the past are not what we want to look for in the future. And I don't think it's the people in that area want to look for in the future. So I would say a full review, and let's try to get it so it makes everybody comfortable, because a lot of these developments now who are coming out into our area, I think it is being because of HRM slowly filling up and it's boiling over into East Hants. And if we don't get it right, we're going to have more unhappy people as we've seen in the past. And it's like I said, we're not creating, that's not creating a community. It's hoarding people on small locations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the biggest thing we have to take from this is that, you know, we have to hear from the public, right? Because we've had some views and we've had some opposition to some multi-unit buildings. But I mean, if you look at, I'll give an example where my mother lives. There are 6 residents from East Hants that live in her multi-unit building because when they went to downsize, there was nowhere for them to stay in their community. So there's that side of the fact you have to look at as well. But that's why the community needs to have their say. So I'm going to move that that we table this until such time that we get community consultation back on the changes to the proposed development agreement.
We have a mover, we have a seconder, seconded by Councillor Knockwood. Any discussion on the motion? Sam, you wanted to comment? Oh. Okay, be looking for the question to put this aside until the public consultation comes back in front of council till we have a chance to review the questionnaires and that for ourselves and then move forward after that. Anybody prepared to ask a question?
Question.
You don't vote on a table motion, do you?
Still have to approve it. Yeah, still has to be voted. It could be defeated.
Okay.
Question.
Question's been called. We will go to the vote. All in favor? Okay, that motion is passed unanimously to put this off until we have public consultation back to council. Warden Ralston.
I would move that we recommend to council that staff be directed to do a review on WCCD designations and what zones they are in place on.
I second that.
Moved and seconded by Councillor Cole. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Rhino.
I guess I'm gonna question, does that go far enough? Do we need, is this gonna cover the entire quarter area that we may need to make plans for? So I just kind of like to hear from the mover on that.
Well, I would agree there's probably more that we'll come across that we'll want to look at. But I don't know what other situations might be out there that would lead us here. And without doing a full plan review, I don't know how we would get them. And I'm a little hesitant to ask staff to switch gears and do a full plan review at this stage of the game. Once we hear back from the two reports that are being requested, previous one and this one, maybe that's where we'll find ourselves. And I don't know if through the chair to you, John, and I'm putting you on the spot, and feel free to say off the top of your head you can't answer that, and I'll understand completely. Do you think there are other situations out there, given the recent appetite of council and some of these developments, that might bear some investigation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, that is tough. There might be, but the vast majority of the corridor outside of what's zoned CDD or the commercial zones or the mixed use center is zoned either R1 or R2. So I suspect not. I mean, there's some areas that are zoned R2T. We know it can allow townhouses, but not really high density. So I can't answer that fully, but I think for the most part, most of the undeveloped land that's out there is either zone CDD or R1 or R2.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, that answers your question, Councillor Ryle.
Hey, nobody else? Looking for the question.
Question.
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. All in favor? Okay, I need just to keep your hands up longer. There's a little bit of a lag here. And the motion is passed unanimously. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the next item. The Versailles Holdings Limited Discharge of Development Agreement. Councillor Perry, would you take the chair for a few minutes? I have to step away.
Not a problem. Go ahead, Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everybody sees the presentation. Versailles Holding Limited Discharge of Development Agreement. So the applicant is Renos and Restoration Group Inc. on behalf of Versailles Holdings Limited. And the purpose of the application is to discharge the existing development agreements so that the property may be regulated by the multiple unit dwelling R3 zone provisions of the land use bylaw. The existing agreements permitted the development of a 24-unit apartment building, a 28-unit apartment building, and a subdivision of the lands. And the original agreement was entered into in 1986 when the land was zoned R2. So a lot has changed since then. Under the provisions of the 2016 East Hansel Fiscal Community Plan, the existing 24-unit apartment building would be permitted as a right through site plan approval.
Could you change the picture?
Pardon me?
Could you change the pictures? We're still on the opening.
Oh, are you?
It hasn't gone to presentation mode yet, Debbie.
We're
It's
just
still in the.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
Is it good now?
I believe so. Your notes are showing.
We can
as
see
well.
your presentation view or the presenter view, not the presentation view, Deb.
Is that better?
Yes.
That's
There you go.
better. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So the location of the subject property is off of Highway 277, and it's 161 Highway 277 in Lance. It's outlined here in the red. There's approximately 0.75 hectares with 54 meters of frontage along Highway 277 and 82 meters of frontage along Garden Road Extension, or Green Road Extension, sorry. The current use of the property is a 24-unit apartment building, and it's zoned R3, and the surrounding uses. So as part of the, it's also the 28-unit apartment building next door is also owned by Versailles Holdings. So that's also zoned R3. And then there is R2 zoning that has single and two-unit dwellings surrounding the property. And there's a little bit of high-risk floodplain here at the end. So the discharge of the development agreement would only be for this lot here on the 24-unit apartment building. The development agreements would remain in place for the 28-unit apartment building. So again, the purpose is discharge the development agreement so the property can be regulated by the land use bylaw. As that use is permitted as a right. Once the existing agreements have been discharged, the developer plans to continue to develop the subject lands as of right by subdividing the lands into 2 additional parcels and applying for site plan approval for 2 small multiplexes or cluster townhouses. And a small multiplex is only up to 8 units, and a townhouse could either go 6 units if it's a cluster, or if it's a stacked townhouse, it could be 8 units. So here again is the 24-unit apartment building, and this is just a site plan just showing how the lots could potentially be subdivided off. There are some changes that would have to be made to the site plan, but essentially this is what it would be. So there'll be 1 lot subdivided off here, and then the small multiplex would be built, and then another lot created off on this side of the property with a small multiplex. The accesses into the property would remain the same as for the 24-unit dwelling apartment building, and it would be shared parking, which our land use bylaw permits, and they would be required to have the minimum number of parking stalls. So in conclusion, planning staff have reviewed the application by Reynolds and Restoration Group Inc. on behalf of Versailles Holdings Limited based on the applicable policies contained in the Municipal Planning Strategy, Municipal Government Act, and the existing development agreements, and have determined that the request to discharge the agreements is appropriate. Therefore, staff recommend that the 2 existing development agreements and the 1 unsubstantial development agreement amendment be discharged. In doing so, the property located at 161 Highway 277 Lance will be regulated by the multiple unit dwelling R3 zone provisions of the land use bylaw. And recommendation is that the discharge agreement be approved.
Okay, thank you so much. Councillor Green, you ready to take over? The first one up to speak is the warden.
Warden Ralston. You're muted, Warden.
Sorry, having trouble with that today too. Just a question. Could they not do this under development agreement without discharging these?
To you, Mr. Chair, it's the development agreement is only allows the 24-unit apartment building and the 28-unit apartment building. It doesn't allow for anything else to be developed on the property. And because the development agreements were entered into in 1986, and the zoning has changed since then, we can't use the same policies as that were in place in 1986 to consider a substantial amendment to the development agreement. So it has to be discharged in order for it to occur. And the discharge actually allows for a 20, like as a right, he can have a 24-unit apartment building, and to meet the minimum lot area requirements, the setbacks from the adjoining property lines will ensure that that's proper, and that he'll have to meet the parking for the 24-unit apartment building as well.
So this is a situation in which, and I don't particularly anticipate it in this one, that if this were controversial, all we'd have to do is say, no, we're not going to discharge the development agreement, and that's that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you might be able to do that. Yes, you would be able to do that, but he would also have the ability to appeal that decision if it wasn't based on something that was.
Now, excuse me, I find that strange. We have an existing development agreement, a contract signed by the municipality and the developer. I don't think it's appealable after the fact if the developer doesn't like it anymore. I could be wrong about that, but I find that hard to digest.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to confirm with our solicitor to be sure, but I know for unsubstantial amendments and amendments to DAs that they are both appealable as well.
But that's a little different than dismissing a development agreement. We could be in trouble if that's true. We could have developers all over East Hants wanting their development agreements dismissed so they can do something different. So I'd be kind of interested to find that out. However, that may not be a big problem in this. It was just a question I had as I was just wanted to make sure I understood why they wanted the discharge to the development agreement. But I would think, and I would like to have a legal answer to that the municipality does have the right to refuse to discharge a development agreement. It wouldn't make sense to me that we didn't. And if we don't, it'll change the way that I look at development agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Is there anyone else wishing to comment? Have anybody wanting to move the recommended motion? Councillor Hebb.
I'll move the recommended motion as presented.
Have a mover, we have a seconder, seconded by Councillor Perry. Any discussion on the motion?
Question.
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye and raising your hand. And the motion has passed. Any nays? Motion has passed. Councillor Rhino voting nay. Okay, next up, Enfield Dental unsubstantial amendment to development agreement. Is it Andrea? Is that it?
It's Anushri.
Anushri, okay. They have an A and then a period, and then it looks like your last name the way it's on the agenda. I apologize for that.
No worries. I'll just share my screen. So this is an unsubstantial amendment to an existing development agreement. So Enfield Family Dental Center entered into a development agreement for a new dental center building in 2021. So now the unsubstantial amendments, the applicant now wishes to increase the parking spaces from 20 to 24 and to reconfigure the parking lot layout and the entrance to the parking lot. So these requests are permitted to be considered an unsubstantial amendment, and this is the subject site. It's zoned village core. So this is the aerial photography of the site, and as you can see, there is the lot has frontage onto the Highway 2 as well as Shamrock Lane. So the two unsubstantial amendments that the applicant requests for is the increase of parking spaces from 20 to 24 spaces, and a parking lot, the change in the parking lots, which has a wider driver aisle, as well as the change in the parking lot entrance, which is being brought closer. So I'll just show you through the earlier site plan and the current site plan. So this is the site plan that was agreed upon by the existing development agreement. So there was a future development portion of the site which was reserved for future development potential, and this was the location of the driveway. And now with the new, with the unsubstantial amendments, they are proposing to use that future development potential for the addition of the 4 parking spaces. This also gives them more room for a wider driving aisle, and also gives them a little more landscaped area. And the existing driveway that they were proposing earlier is now being brought back into the existing driveway that currently exists on site. So that is now closer to the new dental office that they are building. So the staff reached out to Nova Scotia Public Works because they approved the earlier site plan according to the development agreement, and they do not see any issues with the relocated parking lot entrance on Highway 14. So this is the engagement. So the application will not be required to go through a public process. However, a newspaper ad will be placed and it will be open to appeal. So once council decides whether it approves or refuses, a 14-day appeal period will be there following the newspaper notice. So staff recommends that the requested unsubstantial amendments be approved. And the recommended motion is that Planning Advisory Committee recommends council to approve the application by Enfield Family Dental Center for the unsubstantial amendments to their development agreement.
Thank you. Okay, any discussion on it? Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish it was all so easy. This seems like a benefit for the community. Wider driveway, more parking, better landscaping. So I'm going to move the recommended motion as presented.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Perry, seconded by Deputy Warden Mitchell, Councillor Garden Cole. You wish to speak? Okay. Seeing no one else, be looking for the question.
Question.
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
And the motion is passed unanimously. Okay. Next up, a plan update background paper on roosters. Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just checking to make sure the main screen can be seen. In November, council received a letter from residents regarding the crowing of roosters in our subdivision. As a result of a council discussion, the following motion was passed, and that's motion C21-327. The council directs staff to review the matter during the planning update of the zoned area, and staff notify the residents that this will be undertaken in the plan review. The original letter and response letter to council's discussion has been attached to the staff report for the information of Planning Advisory Committee. Discussions. The current land use bylaw regulations regarding the keeping of poultry was adopted by council in 2018 and is only applicable to the comprehensive plan portion of the municipality. Current regulations allow residents in a single unit dwelling or a 2-unit dwelling to have poultry for personal use as long as they are kept on the owner's property. In July of 2021, council passed motion C21-240 to apply the current keeping of poultry regulations to the future planned area of the municipality. So we know that density in the corridor region of East Hants is increasing. As a result, the ability to own certain livestock may not be appropriate due to noise, smell, or other issues. As presented by the written complaint to council and echoed by other residents in East Hants, roosters can be disturbing to residential areas. A rooster may continually crow throughout the day and night, which can be disturbing to neighbors. Therefore, staff recommend that roosters are not permitted in portions of the municipality serviced by municipal water and or wastewater services due to increasing densities in new neighborhoods. So planning staff proposed amending the keeping of poultry regulations by adding the following provision. Roosters shall not be permitted in areas where municipal water and or wastewater services are available. If council would like to consider further restrictions on the keeping of poultry, staff recommend that a further direction is provided. And in conclusion, staff have responded to motion C21-327 as the municipality continues to grow, our communities become denser, and the ability to own livestock may not be appropriate. Roosters can be disturbing and can continually crow. And regulations proposed as part of the background paper will not come in effect until the plan update has been completed. So just to acknowledge that those regulations regarding roosters won't come into effect until after the plan update has been finalized. And the recommendation that authorize staff to amend the land use bylaw to prohibit roosters in areas of the municipality serviced by water and or wastewater services. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Warden Ralston.
Thank you. Well, fortunately, I don't live in that area of the municipality, but I am going to correct a bit of misinformation. Roosters do not crow endlessly at night. Roosters don't crow after dark. I've owned roosters for many, many years. Yes, they do crow in the daylight, and they may crow some through the day, but I've never had a rooster that crowed endlessly through the day. I've never found a rooster crowing to be any louder than a dog barking. So I just wonder, you know, are we going to be back here at some point saying that folks in the serviced area can't have dogs? Because I will tell you that many dogs make far more noise than most roosters. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Councillor Hibb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to disagree with the warden. My neighbors have roosters, and I know before I've gone to work at 4 or 5 in the morning, dark, and I hear roosters crowing. Now, whether they're outdoors or inside, maybe there's a light on or not, I don't know.
They must have a light.
But, you know, this complaint is from my area, and it's in a subdivision. We have people who work from home now, and their office is right next door to where these roosters are, and they do crow all day because I hear them from my place. They're all day, but there's one or two I don't know. But it is annoying, and they may not be loud to some people, but when you hear them all day, it is annoying. And a good point with dogs barking. Yes, dogs are louder too, and whatever. But I guess my question through the staff is the plan update. When is that proposed to be through?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we were hoping to go to a public hearing in the summertime, but I don't know if that's going to be possible, just based on the amount of reports still to do and the fact that COVID, depending on if we can have our second round of public meetings and how that affects that. So it just really depends now.
So it could be fall then before it comes through. Yeah. So these residents have to go through basically another whole summer of listening to roosters crow. And I'm just wondering, is there any avenues that we can take as you know, people are sitting around in the evening, or they got company in there, and these roosters are continually crowing? The quality of life is certainly going downhill, and they would be considered to me as a nuisance in the subdivision. Is there anything that we can do, or is this an RCMP issue, or who could be responsible for this, looking after this?
To you, Mr. Chair, the only regulations we have regarding poultry is that they have to be kept on their lot. So any roosters that are there now, they would be continue to actually be allowed even once the regulations are adopted, just that no new ones could be brought in. So any rooster that's living on somebody's land, it doesn't even stop that rooster from existing there until it's gone. It can't come back again. So, but as for regulations, the only regulations we have is just to make sure that they stay on the land. I think we've discussed noise regulations in the past, and it's difficult to regulate noise because roosters make noise, and it's just one of those issues. John, I don't know if you can speak further on that.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the general principle is that if you got a land use activity that's permitted, and the noise level with that activity is what you would expect, So, if you have a lumber mill that's permitted, it's going to make noise and people have to expect that. Similarly, if you have roosters and you're permitted to have roosters, and we do have regulations that all they say is they have to be on your property, then there's really there's no fix through the noise regulations of the community standards bylaw.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, if I have a neighbor who wants to play the drums outside and he's out there playing them day after day after day, and to me, that's certainly a nuisance and it's my quality of life has gone hill. So as a resident, I have nowhere to turn.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, that's a little bit different. That's specifically addressed in the community standards bylaw, and would be kind of a fine line considered an activity, not a land use. I mean, we can investigate it further if you want, but when we looked at it in the past, that's kind of what we've run into with things like this.
So if this policy is passed and goes through, anybody who has roosters, are they going to be grandfathered in? They'll be allowed to keep them?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, they would be allowed to maintain their roosters until that rooster's gone.
Well, I really feel sorry for the residents of East Hants who live in the subdivisions, because you might get another 15 more roosters out there this year and there's nothing we can do about it. Thank you.
Deputy Warden Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up what the warden was saying, yes, roosters, I don't have any in my area, but I do have barking dogs that bark regularly when you walk by, and also I hear them evenings, and also when I'm out walking, I have come across dog feces that isn't collected by the owners, or I come across ones that have been collected, but the bag has been dropped along the side of the road. So those are just my comments, and I don't think the roosters are that bad. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Warden Ralston.
Thank you. Well, and this would only take effect in areas that have sewer and or wastewater. I'm going to question the grandfathering, because in grandfathering anywhere else, it's just that if the use is discontinued of the land, and if as a property owner, they have backyard chickens and they have a rooster to keep the hens company, I don't believe it would have to be the same rooster. If the purpose of having backyard chickens is to provide fertile eggs, then I don't think that when your rooster gets old and dies, that it would prohibit getting another rooster, as long as the rooster was there within the time frame so that the use was not discontinued.
For you, Mr. Chair, we did discuss that actually, trying to figure out semantics about at what point in time would the rooster considered no longer being able to come back. And we figured in the end, we'd probably need a legal opinion, but thought towards that once the rooster was off the property, that the new regulations would then take place.
I think I would disagree with that if you went to court, because based on the way grandfathering works with everything else in the municipality, that's like saying if you're running a mill, as John said, and it was allowed when you built the mill and you're allowed to run the mill, that's like saying as soon as you saw all the logs you've got on the property now, you can't saw anymore. So I kind of look at it the same way. So I guess those are just my my comments. Like I said, I'm kind of glad to live where I live, and I have 2 roosters, and they don't disturb me. They don't disturb my neighbors because I've asked. I do want to have good neighbors and good relations with my neighbors, and they don't mind my roosters or my guinea fowl. So I am very fortunate to live where I live, I guess, with the neighbors I have. But I do, I think it's just that the sound of a rooster crowing is different than the sound of a dog barking. I don't think it's any louder or any more frequent. I think it's just perhaps different, but I don't particularly see it differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Councillor Rhino.
Hello, yes. I've just got visions of a drum playing rooster. It's going through my mind, so. And I didn't know roosters had grandfathers, but anyway, it's be getting late in the day. I guess I have to put myself in the situation, like you're in a subdivision and, you know, a rooster crowing would drive me over the end, I think. And I can understand that. You know, there's a lot of people that work shift work. We have a lot more of a chance in a subdivision for different vocations at different times. And it would be, it would be annoying. You know, we can't, and I was under the assumption we can have barking dogs seen to by our bylaw enforcement if they're barking excessively. So I can see this. I mean, being brought up in the country, you know, we tend to accept roosters for better or worse. But when you get a density problem, and like in subdivisions, I can see it can add to a problem. So, but you know, to Councillor Hibb, I don't think it's going to solve his problem where he lives with his roosters, because if this recommended motion is served by water or wastewater services, so probably wouldn't fix Councillor Hibb his own problem, but it might fix one of his residents if they live in those areas. But and also, if this motion did pass, would that be transferred to the new unplanned area out here in the area? So that's a question, but I do feel for the people that are in subdivisions and have to listen to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of on same side as Warden, and in many recent application that we get, people want the rural feel of Elmsdale or Enfield and stuff, and I think animal belongs there. So I don't know if for every person that complain, we're gonna change the whole bylaw for the whole community and take away from many people that are living here for many years and they want this type of life. So I'm kind of, I don't know. I know it's not my area. I know there's a counselor over there know what's good for them and stuff, but I feel that the people of Enfield, they miss their rural area, they miss their rural feeling and life and stuff. So I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think we should change for one person. We could probably talk to the guy. I know rooster won't grow until they see light. So I think I have roosters here and they grow at night, probably because I turn the light on and I have a glass door for them. So I think I should change my door too. So it could be some way to fix that problem in the nighttime, other than banning the whole thing. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Musa. Councillor Eisner.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I was a count for 4-H for 25 years. We had a lot of kids in the, just the residential areas, and they needed to have their trio in order to do 4-H if they're going to do poultry showing. And poultry was one thing that rabbits they could actually do in small communities, whereas the kids were doing calves. It's a little harder to show that, but so those kids felt part of it. I just don't support this. No. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hibb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple points of clarification. My neighbors have roosters, and I don't really have a problem with them. That's not the issue there. And when we talk about changing policies for one person who has a complaint, we just went through a whole policy change for somebody who couldn't sleep at night because woodworkers were working in the woods behind their house. That was a big issue. And, you know, then that was something that was only going to last for a few weeks or a month, not a whole year. This family continues to keep roosters all the time. You can just imagine, you know, you're 20 feet away from a rooster was crowing constantly all day, and you're trying to work from your home. So what do? Change your office to another place, or you'll go back to your office in town, wherever it's at, for the sake of a rooster. And this is for any subdivision, there's water and stormwater issues. It's not in the rural area at all. This is for subdivisions. And you know, gosh, we could have a whole issue in this hand if it's not looked after now. And now is the time to do it. So, thank you.
Thank you,
And,
Councillor Hibb.
I'll move the recommended motion as presented.
Hey, we have a mover. Do we have a seconder? We have a mover. Do we have a seconder? Sam, you're seconding that? Yep, Sam Balcom has seconded. Any more discussion on the motion? Warden Ralston.
Speaking against the motion, yeah, to follow up on Councillor Eisner, I too have been a 4-H leader, and back last term when I was on Ag Advisory, that was one of the reasons that roosters were not addressed at that time, was the fact that it was one of, well, probably only 2 animal projects that kids could take in 4-H, and there is a requirement. If you're taking poultry, you have to have a trio, 2 hens and a rooster. And that we did take into consideration at that time. I won't be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden Ralston. Any more discussion? Not, I'd be looking for Councillor Perry.
Sorry, there, computer messed up. Yeah, confused on this one a little bit. So it says anywhere where there's service and water. Do we not have service and water going out past the municipal building onto some actual large parcels of land going up that way?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in Milford's, the services stop just around the school area, or right around the high school. So just beyond the high school, at the actual municipal building there, it's the old municipal building, it stops.
No, I'm talking because this isn't just for Milford. This is for the entire municipality. Anywhere where there's water and service, they will not be allowed to have roosters.
That's
and
correct.
There are some very large parcels of land and homeowners that have a large parcels of land that are on municipal services, correct?
Through Mr. Chair, yes, there are some parcels of land that's larger than the minimum density, minimum lot sizes. Yeah.
So could we be putting this in and then all of a sudden a hobby farm is no longer allowed to have roosters because they are on municipal service by municipal wastewater and sewer? Because I'm looking here and it says just service by water. It doesn't say subdivision. It doesn't mention a lot size or anything else. It just says water and sewer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we did that because, as we know, a lot of land is under development right now, so we can't predict what parcels are going to be subdivided and start going through the development process and what parcels are not. So this way, it just is applicable. You could butt up right beside a larger piece of parcel with a whole bunch of development around it. It was just an easier way to be applicable instead of picking individual lots where it may or may not be applicable, because even if you have a 5-acre lot, your house could still be right beside some higher density development and those roosters could still cause issues. So it's just an easier way of creating regulations, and that would apply from now and into the future as the corridor continues to develop.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't think there's any large parcels of land with homes on them. The water and sewer go to Carmies in that area. So there's not a lot of large, or if any, large properties with homes on them, if that's your direct question about that particular area.
Well, I'm looking at the fact that we have water and sewer being expanded up past the superstore and moving up that way to service some developments and some homes in that area, and the parcels of land that abut up to the river are quite large. And I don't know if any of them are currently that would be, the deputy ward would know more about that area. I just, my question is, and concern is that by putting just municipal service and water, it might not be meeting the intent of what Councillor Hebb wants, because some of his subdivisions might not be serviced, and we could have large landowners that have horses and who knows whatever that are on municipal water and services. So that's just my question. I just need some clarification to understand that, because this will be a blanket policy affecting everybody in the municipality that's currently on services. That's why I'm asking the question.
Councillor Rhino.
Yes, so just to be clear, so single service such as water and Shubenacadie, the people would not be affected by this?
Through Mr. Yes, Shubenacadie, anybody that have water or sewer services in Shubenacadie would be impacted.
Yeah, I thought it was. I thought it was both, and I guess I just didn't interpret that right, which to me would make her bring it back into a smaller group or smaller area, because I think, I support some kind of regulation on this. I really do, but I think maybe we should look at it in a different way to make sure that we're exactly hitting those high density areas, not piecemealing this through and getting places that really have a rooster would have no effect on neighboring properties. So is there any way we could work something else out here?
Through Mr. Chair, the issue comes in that, for example, as we go to Carmies on those larger lots, those areas are becoming developed. So there's a high density development that was already approved by council, and the same goes for some of the other lots. So it's hard to determine where the higher density development is going to occur and at what point in time that they might run into the same issue that the resident in Milford has run into, is that the existing roosters are causing issues to nearby residents. It also is hard to determine whereabout on the property somebody can have a rooster and that won't cause issues, because you could still have a large lot, but yet you could have your roosters within a certain distance of higher density development. Now, we could put in regulations, I suppose, if you wanted to, saying that the roosters have to be, 100 meters away from the property line, so that would have to be in the middle of a larger lot or something to that effect. I'm not quite sure what the distance would be, but
the more I kind of delve into this and understand a little bit better the motion, I don't think it's hitting what we really wanted to hit, and which are your high density areas. And those are just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knockwood.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, what a discussion on this. I understand Councillor Hibbs' concerns and the wardens also. It's all pretty well valid, but like in Shubenacadie, they have big backyards, and they're going to, some people may get some roosters, and maybe they're involved in 4-H because we're a farming community out here. I just think if we can tweak the motion, I agree with the noise, like the barking dogs, the loud cars. They go at night all night too. And out here in Indian Brook, sometimes you see some people beating a drum with your next door neighbors all the time, playing the drums. But I don't know. I just, as it stands right now, I would have to go against the motion, and it feels like I don't want to, but when you got wastewater service and water service in the community of Shubenacadie, it kind of puts me in a hard spot. So is there any type of way that we can tweak this motion to maybe different areas, maybe like the farming communities, I don't know, subdivisions, I really, I'm getting twisted, like, as I stand right now, like I said, I can't support the motion because the village of Shimonaki, they built on farmlands, they got big backyards, and so it's a hard thing to think about now. I didn't thought it wasn't, I don't think it was a big deal with it talking about roosters, but now it is. Holy moly. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. Is there a way that we could look at this as like a nuisance animal? Like very much like we deal with nuisance dogs, with nuisance whatever for noise? Because this would be, to me, is the rooster is just the method, but it's more or less an animal. Just like you can have a neighbor that ties their dog in their backyard all day long and it barks from sun up to sundown. I've even had residents that work from home complain about children being outside during COVID because they make too much noise while they're trying to work. So it's we got to kind of look at a way about what is a nuisance. And we currently have a nuisance bylaw, I do believe, for barking dogs.
Mr. Chair, it's a community standards bylaw, and it's the noise section of the community standards bylaw.
So under the community sections bylaw, could we not have roosters fall underneath the same thing as a dog would be? That if they're being excessive past normal, what one would consider normal hours, that it could be enforced? Because I mean, it is an animal, and I don't know if the SPCA are bylaw enforcement people for dogs or whatever do stuff with roosters or poultry, but I wonder if it could be administered similar to that, because like Councillor Knockwood said, to me, it's the wording and the effect on the whole municipality, not the actual intent of what we're trying to accomplish here by allowing people to have the enjoyment of their homes. Thank you.
Councillor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm agreeing with Councillor Rhino in that the more in the beginning, I was totally that yes, a rooster is unexpected in a subdivision, and I agreed with this. The more I learn about it, the more I realize that there are catchment areas here that could very well should be able to have roosters and aren't going to be if we use this wording. You mentioned about, you know, if we did use 100 meters from the property line, it might just, you know, allow people who have bigger properties. But yeah, I'm in agreement that if we could word this differently, it might be more effective than the way it is right now. And I know you want to speak, Debbie, so go ahead, if I can give you permission.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was just going to mention that if you do want to go to a different route, I'd like to have some direction, because really the rooster issue and the poultry in the past has gone on for many reports. So it would be helpful to staff just to have a direction so I can tailor my next report to that direction, I guess.
Well, if I can just continue with.
I believe this motion has already been made.
Okay.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. No, it is. So I want the discussion to this motion, not potential things in the future or anything. This discussion will be to this motion. There may be the will of council or the majority of council. We may not want to do anything with roosters. That is always on the table as well. So let's deal with this motion and then we'll move on from that.
Question.
Councillor Hibbs up to speak to the motion. Councillor Hibb.
No, we'll just let it go to a vote, Mr. Chair.
Okay. You're looking for the question. Question's been called. We will go to the vote. All in favor, please signify by raising your hand saying aye.
Aye. Alone.
Councillor Hibb is aye, and the rest of us are nay on the motion. Okay, now, Councillor Garden Cole, what would you be proposing?
Well, Debbie said that she was looking for direction, and I guess, and maybe it's going to be very challenging for you to find somehow that densely populated subdivisions don't get roosters, but that other more rural areas that may still get sewer or water are allowed to have roosters. I mean, I know that's a huge ask with not enough direction, but that's kind of what I don't really know how to direct it any more acutely than that. And maybe someone else does. So I'll turn it over to the next person.
Have anybody else wishing to comment? Councillor Perry.
I'll say it again. Could we not encompass the nuisance part of what this resident is experiencing underneath our community standards bylaw if it is going on after hours and all hours of the day? Would that be any different than a barking dog or a donkey or, you know, a cat or whatever that falls under our community standards bylaw? Is there not a way that it can be written in that way? Is that a way that it could go move forward and meet the intent, Debbie? I don't know.
To you, Mr. Chair, I just want to contact our solicitor because our land use bylaw enables it, and I wouldn't want to have another bylaw that kind of limits what a rooster does naturally, and you can't really take them inside to hide them away. So I'll contact the solicitor and get some information on that for you. Okay.
Councillor Head, would you like to weigh in there where you were on before?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do. I just want to point out that, take for instance, Shubenacadie. I mean, if you went to Shubenacadie, the houses are side by side all the way right down through the bottom of the Conley Hill. Then you got Conley Hill, but it also goes out through the Mill Village where the houses are side by side too. Some of them are not really big lots, but they're fairly big lots, and that is no different than a subdivision. If you have one of your neighbors with a rooster crowing all the time, yeah, you might have water and sewer and you might have a bigger lot, but if it's somebody has a rooster that's right next door to their neighbors, it's the same issue. And by going by lot size, it's the same thing. You could have 20 acres out there and you put a rooster pen over next to your lawn so it doesn't bother you, but it's right up against your neighbor. So, you know, it's very hard to do. And I think this nuisance thing by law, if we can add that in there, would be possibly the way to go. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Rhino.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would move that staff gather information in the form of a report with what's being said here today and bring back some type of solution, whether it be by nuisance bylaw, whether it be by density, whether it be by lot size, and it brings back some kind of report that may deal with this issue. I so move.
Seconded by Councillor Knockwood. Councillor Eisner, you're on before the motion. I'll give you some leeway to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right. Maybe this will help Debbie out. Could we lump the poultry under pets? Because that's what they are for these kids. Dogs, cats, pets, lizards, snakes, they're all pets. So if that would help them out, and if they have another byproduct problem in each critter, then you have to deal with that separately, like a dog barking or chicken crowing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eisner. Councillor Knockwood. You're muted, Councillor.
I was thinking now, if somebody use them for a service animal, would that be another way a person trying to keep their rooster classify them as a service animal? Would that be put into a regulations of something, a service animal?
To you, Mr. Chair, we have no regulations regarding service animals under the land use bylaw. Poultry is just defined as the birds themselves. It doesn't distinguish whether it's a service animal or any other type of pet.
Okay, I was just wondering about service animals. I just kind of, there's a lot of different service animals people use, I guess. Okay.
Hey, Councillor Head.
Yeah, just a thought, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Would this be something that should go to the Agricultural Committee?
No.
Your thoughts, Debbie?
To you, Mr. Chair, we had discussed that, but it was directed that we bring it back to PAC with a report to a plan as part of the plan update. So we didn't go to the Agriculture Advisory Committee.
Good, thank you.
Warden Ralston.
Just a caution, if you go the community standards bylaw, it's not going to work. It's not going to do what you want it to do, because I know roosters crow, but I have yet to hear one that crows over and over and over and over and over consistently for a long length of time. They lose their ability to crow. They lose their voices. But I'm thinking that, you know, maybe you want to, maybe it is, I don't know, lot sizes or you know, certain zoning and certain lot sizes in the serviced area. I don't know. I can understand that maybe people in some really dense areas don't like it. Doesn't bother me. But, and I do, you know, I have a niece that lives in Sackville. She doesn't have a rooster, but she has chickens in her backyard. And Councillor Eisner is absolutely right. Some of these 4-H kids that are taking poultry and 4-H, they are pets. You know, they carry them around. They have to be able to show them and flip them and do all this stuff. So it's a tough one, but yeah, I'm glad that this one didn't fly, because I think it was much too broad. So it'll be interesting. I don't envy staff their job, because I don't think you're going to be able to make everybody happy. Your challenge will be to make a majority happy, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no one else, looking for the question's been called. We'll go to the vote for a report to be brought back with other alternatives. All in favor? And the motion has passed with Councillor Garden Cole. Are you against? You and Councillor Musa, are you for? Councillor Musa, you're against?
No, I'm for. I just wasn't sure you had counted the hands.
Councillor Musa voting nay. Okay, on to the next one. Campground licensing report. Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just give me one moment there. Campground licensing bylaw discussion. So at their November 2021 meeting, Council passed motion C-21-343 directing staff to investigate options by way of policies, licensing, etc., which would allow Council to address concerns with pre-existing campgrounds. Planning staff have reviewed the Municipal Government Act and have contacted the municipal solicitor and have determined that such a bylaw can be created. The new bylaw cannot deal with matters that should be regulated under the land use bylaw, such as setbacks from property lines, lot area, lot frontage, and so on. At their November meeting, Council also passed motion C-21-342, which authorized staff to include provisions in the land use bylaw to regulate new campgrounds by site plan approval as part of the plan update. So there are currently 14 campgrounds operating in East Hants, and there are 2 potential future campgrounds in development that are not shown on the map on the next screen. Previous to 2019, these campgrounds were licensed by the province under the Tourist Accommodations Act. The act was repealed and replaced with the Tourist Accommodation Registration Act, which only applies to roofed accommodations like cabins and cottages. So the province no longer regulates campgrounds, and that's why I guess municipalities are taking another look at the campgrounds. So it's also attached to the staff report if you're interested, but these are the East Hants campgrounds, and each of the numbers relate to one of these little maps here. The municipal solicitor has indicated that the council has the ability to create a campground licensing bylaw, or many of the items that council requested staff consider could be addressed by existing bylaws. For example, the community standards and solid waste bylaw, so you could address your noise, some of the smoke and issues, or solid waste issues by those bylaws. Items related to land use cannot be regulated by the campground licensing bylaw. And prior to developing a new bylaw, planning staff recommend consulting with the current campground owners for their input. And council may also want to request comments from the general public to help fully understand challenges with living near a campground. A campground licensing bylaw would require additional staff time to register all campgrounds and to ensure the campgrounds were in compliance with the requirements of licensing. It would also take additional time to help get campgrounds that were not in compliance with the bylaw into compliance, or to chase down or shut down campgrounds that do not apply for the license. Planning staff have reviewed similar types of bylaws from jurisdictions outside of Nova Scotia and have noted that some of the more common items that are regulated by the bylaws include timeframes for the operation of the campground season, site plan and utility layout, application fees, requirements for washroom, laundry, garbage disposal facilities and recreational areas, requirement for stormwater management plan, ability to suspend or revoke a campground license, and yearly renewal of a license. Also within the staff report, I had included some of the items that were indicated or that were required by the province when they did the licensings at campgrounds. So that's in the staff report as well. So as an alternative to developing a campground licensing bylaw, council may instead consider using the existing municipal bylaws to enforce items such as noise, air quality, smoke, light control, and solid waste. In addition, if staff feels there are issues with septic or gray water disposal, Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change may be contacted for further investigation. So along with using existing bylaws and provincial regulations, planning staff also recommend conducting a campaign to educate existing campground owners on current East Hants regulations that would be relevant to their operation. The intention would be to have the educational campaign completed before the spring camping season begins in May. And so in conclusion, East Hants Council can create the campground licensing bylaw. However, the bylaw cannot control items that are regulated by the land use bylaw. Instead, the bylaw can contain information on application fees, stormwater management, provincial approvals, washrooms, laundry, noise, and smoke. As an alternative to moving forward with the development of a campground licensing bylaw, staff recommend proceeding with an educational campaign for current campground owners. And the campaign would identify how existing bylaws may be used to control items, such as the noise, air quality, and light control and solid waste. So the recommendation is that Planning Advisory Committee recommend that council authorize staff to conduct an educational campaign with campground owners on East Hants bylaws that regulate noise, air quality, light control, and solid waste. The recommended motion is there. And then we've also prepared an alternative recommendation. If you want to move forward with the campground licensing bylaw, we would recommend that staff proceed with consultation with current campground owners and the general public on the development of the proposed bylaw. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Councillor Rhino, I've got you down, Warden.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was the one that was kind of heading this up because I've got complaints out in my area about a certain campground. And I really don't, this recommendation is really, there shouldn't even be a recommendation because to me, that's nothing. The campground that I'm talking about borders on right behind a resident area, right behind the house. There's no form of buffering. There's no fence. There's no nothing. So people all hours of the night or going out back urinating and so on. And so I can go on and go on about this. You mean to tell me from this that there is nothing that we can put in place that would require a buffer or a fence between the lines? Like, I mean, it's hard to believe there's nothing we can do to help these people out.
Through you, Mr. Chair, anything that's required under the land use bylaw that should be regulated under the land use bylaw has to be regulated as per the land use bylaw. And because the campground is existing, we can't go back and tell them to put in a buffer. However, if the people are not using proper washroom facilities or there's not proper washroom facilities there, then we can contact Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change and ask them to do an inspection. Or if we do create a campground licensing bylaw, we could require that that washrooms be available, and say how many washrooms per, I don't know, per site or something like that. I'd have to do a little bit more research, but telling them to put up a buffer, I don't believe we can do that because it has to be regulated by the land use bylaw and it's already in existence.
There's nothing we can do. We can't even have them have a setback from the property lines.
You, Mr. Chair, no.
That just blows me away that we can't protect the rights of residents from a campground. And I don't know. I'm very frustrated with this. There's nothing you say we can do. So it's too bad, so sad. Put up with it. That doesn't really fly. I don't know what else I can say. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I mean, that's just a principle of planning in general, that because we have a land use that's been established in an area where there were no land use regulations, when we bring land use regulations into play, you can't retroactively apply them. That's to protect landowners' rights who've established a land use legally. And this would have been established legally because there were no land use regulations there at the time. I mean, there are some things we can do, as Debbie pointed out, in the licensing bylaw, or I guess with more aggressive enforcement of other provisions. But in terms of a land use, like establishing a buffer or requiring screening, those are land use issues that can only be dealt with in a land use bylaw.
Respectfully, John, you know how this would, trying to deal with this in another way would just drag out and drag out and drag out. And I don't think we get any resolution to it. Like I said, I'm very, very disappointed that we can't protect these residents out there who are bordering on campgrounds, and actually they were there before the campground. So how is that fair?
Councillor Warden Ralston.
Thank you. Well, I see no harm in going out and trying to educate the campground owners. I'm wondering, Councillor Rhino, is the one that you're talking about even on the list that staff has provided?
To you, Mr. Chair, what's the name of the campground? And I can.
It's Shenanigans.
Okay.
Yeah, it's right up in the corner in George Field.
George Field.
Mr. Chair, it is there, number 6 on the map.
So you see that corner right up there? Take your point right there. There's where the issue is, right there.
So I guess education, we can certainly try. I think we would need a combination. I think we should have a licensing bylaw at the very least, and that would at least prevent any new problems from occurring perhaps. And maybe we have to look at something under the land use bylaw, which I understand would also only apply to new campgrounds going forward. But at least with a licensing bylaw, if any campgrounds were not complying, their license to operate could be revoked and they could be shut down. So those are my comments. I don't see the two recommendations as alternative at all. I see, staff conducting an educational campaign with campground owners on the bylaws as they currently exist. And also at that time, let them know we're actively looking at introducing a licensing bylaw. And because I do think a licensing bylaw, it won't solve this particular problem, maybe, but it will prevent could prevent similar problems from cropping up in the future. So
that almost sounds like a motion, Warden, is it?
Well, I would move that staff be authorized to conduct an educational campaign with campground owners on East Hants bylaws that regulate noise, air quality, light control, and solid waste, and that campground owners be put on notice that we are considering introducing a campground licensing bylaw, and that I guess I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Perry and Hebb, you both are on before. You'll have some leeway. Go ahead, Councillor Perry.
I was going to make the same motion as the warden. Thank you.
Councillor Hebb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Just a solution to the resident on Shenanigans Campground there. Maybe they should get some roosters and put up there, and that way it would keep the campers from camping near them. Thank you.
Would that be roosters that played the drums, Councillor?
It could be.
Okay, Warden Ralston.
And depending on, I guess through you to staff, is there benefit to, besides pursue, and I'm gonna make another motion. I would also move that staff continue to investigate what a campground licensing bylaw would look like first. I'll make that a motion.
Okay, we already have one motion on the floor, Warden.
Oh, I thought we
First-
voted on that. I'm sorry. I'll make that motion afterwards. Okay.
Okay.
And
Any
I'll
more
ask my
discussion on the-
question. Okay.
Any more discussion on the motion that is on the floor? Not if you look
Question.
for the question. Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. All in favor signify by aye. And it has passed unanimously. I think, was your hand up for that, Councillor Rhino? Did you vote? You voted nay?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Rhino voting nay. Okay, back to you, Warden.
First, before I put my next motion on the floor through you to staff, is there benefit in looking at something in the land use bylaw around campgrounds?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you've already passed, council's already passed a motion back in November, which authorized staff to include provisions in the land use bylaw to regulate new campgrounds by site
Okay,
plan
right.
approval. So
Okay.
there's already that background report with the regulations in there.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. Thank you. So I would move that staff be directed to continue to work on developing a licensing bylaw for campgrounds.
Have a mover, to have a seconder?
Second.
Seconded by public member Balcom. Any discussion on the motion?
Question.
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. All in favor? And it has passed unanimously. Okay, so that concludes the campground. Now up to another exciting topic, Road Gap Project 2. Tippy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just share. All right, can you see my presentation in presentation mode?
Yes.
Yeah, again.
Perfect. So this is the second report for the Road Gap Project 2. And just a review of some of the background. In the spring of 2010, staff prepared a list of publicly owned unpaved gap and dead-end roads within the South Corridor and Commercial Growth Management Area. These roads were determined to be unlikely to pass the petition process via bylaw F100 as individual petitions because paving such small sections of the road would amount to high costs for a small number of property owners. At that time, council moved that all roads identified be petitioned as one, and a petition was carried out in the spring of 2011, but it was unsuccessful. In June of 2021, council made a motion directing staff to prepare a report regarding road gaps for further discussion. And a report was brought to PAC January 18th, 2022, outlining 2 proposed scenarios. Council then directed staff to provide a second report with different funding options and more detail. So originally, staff identified 21 sections of unpaved publicly owned road within the SCC GMA. Of those, 9 were considered true gap roads and 12 are dead ends. For this project, with the options presented today, staff are proposing to include the 9 true gap roads and 2 municipal dead end roads that fall within neighborhoods that are either already entirely paved or are proposed to be paved through this process. And staff are recommending that council proceed with the local improvement at their discretion via section 9.1 of the local improvement bylaw without a petition. So I've just done up a few maps to give a better picture of where these roads are. You'll see that the municipally owned roads are in blue and the provincially owned roads are in green. So these ones are Boyd Avenue, Wilson Avenue, Mackenzie Court, and Shauna Lee Lane, and those are all in Enfield. There's the one dead end West Court, that's a municipally owned road in Elmsdale. And then there are Keys Lane, Brookside Avenue, Acorn Avenue, Hazelwood Avenue, Carla Dawn Avenue, and Mariah Drive in Lance. And I've just provided some pictures here of some of the road conditions. So these are the roads in Enfield and Elmsdale, and there are a couple additional pictures for each road in the appendix of the report. And then here are the road conditions in Lance. So again, the typical distribution of costs under a regular petition process, you would see the province contributing 50% of the cost of paving roads that they own upon request. The municipality typically contributing 10% of the cost of paving municipally owned roads as per section 9.13 of the local improvement bylaw. And the remaining costs are paid by the property owners with direct frontage on the affected road. And just as a note, if the identified roads for this project were individually petitioned today based on the above, and each property was charged on a per lot basis, the charges range from about $1,769 to $10,216, with an average cost of $5,420 per property. And all but one road would see charges above $3,500 per property. So for the proposed distribution of costs for this project, staff are recommending distributing the cost of the paving petition between multiple stakeholders to help reduce the financial burden on the few property owners that are directly affected by the local improvement. So staff have prepared two new options for consideration. Oops. So in option one, it's the same. The province contributes 50% of the cost of paving provincially owned roads, but the lump sum contribution is applied to the overall project. And then in this scenario, the municipality would contribute 10% of the cost of paving the roads towards the overall project. And that's suggested to come from the paving reserve, which is typically where the money for paving petitions would come from. And the remaining costs are divided amongst taxpayers in three charge categories who may directly and or indirectly benefit from the paving of the gap roads. For option two, same thing for the province, 50% of the cost of paving provincially owned roads towards the whole project. But the municipality, the option here is contributing a lump sum of $150,000 towards the overall project. An amount equal to 10% of the cost of paving the roads is proposed to come from the paving reserve. And the remaining amount to make up the 150 is proposed to come from either the paving reserve or the gravel program reserve or the 2021-2022 year-end surplus, or any combination of any of those. And this would require an amendment to section 9.13 of the bylaw to allow for a contribution greater than 10%. And again, number three is the same for the taxpayer three charge categories. So staff note that the funds in the transportation paving reserve haven't been used since this reserve was initially established in 2009. So council may choose to consider drawing more than 10% from that reserve if option two is accepted. Additionally, council may choose to vary the ratios and draw from one, two, or all three of the identified funds for this project. And just a recap of the charge categories. So for these are the same for both options one and two. Charge category one are your direct or dual access properties. They have direct or dual access on an identified unpaved road to be charged about the same as property owners for similar local improvements in the past. Charge category two are those with indirect access to an identified unpaved road to be charged a little bit less. And charge category three is alternative access, but with frontage on an identified unpaved road, or those in the neighborhood that would likely benefit, to be charged less than one and two. And this category includes an estimated number of new lots for the two bulk land parcels owned and being developed by Seven Lakes Development Group in Lance. So just done up another few maps here just to give a better idea. The red properties are those with direct or dual access on the unpaved roads. The green properties are those that have alternative access or are likely to benefit. And then the blue ones are indirect access, which you don't see here in Enfield. And same here in Elmsdale and Westport. The red are your direct and the green are alternative likely benefit. And here in Lance, you'll see some of those indirect properties here on Alder Crescent and at the end of Acorn, and then those bulk lands that have an estimated number of lots included. And here's our updated table with the two new options. So option one is that 10% municipal contribution, and that's before HST. So you'll see the percent here comes in at a little bit less than 10% of the total cost. And then option two is the $150,000 lump sum, which comes in at about 24.7%. I've added a column here for the number of properties within each charge category. This is the upfront cost per property based on either option. And then we added in columns for if the total cost was paid over 10 years and what that cost would look like year to year. So all of the costs in the table are approximate and will be updated at the time of the local improvement. The distribution of the taxpayer's contribution amongst the different categories may be adjusted, but it's generally suggested to follow the formula here. So category 1, 60 to 70%, category 2, 2 to 5, category 3, 15 to 30%. And finally here, just a couple timeline considerations. I mentioned in the last presentation that a local improvement may not be imposed by council for a period of 3 years after a failed petition. And the most recent individual petition was carried out and failed in November of 2019. So no local improvement charges may be applied until November of 2022. And just some new information we got from Nova Scotia Public Works. They've communicated that the current cost share program, that 50% for provincial roads, will likely still be available in both the 2022-23 fiscal year and the 2023-24. However, they may not carry on this program in the future. Therefore, staff are proposing this project be carried out in 2023 to benefit from the provincial funding. So the recommendation is that Planning Advisory Committee recommend that council authorize staff to proceed with this local improvement based on one of the two options outlined in the report, and that staff be directed to draft an amendment to the local improvement bylaw, and that the road gap project be included in the 2022-2026 capital budget for construction in 2023. Oops. Sorry.
Okay, Warden Ralston.
I would move option one.
Mover, do we have a seconder? Councillor Perry, you're seconding that? No? You're on to speak. Councillor Musa, are you seconding it? Councillor, seconded by Councillor Musa. Okay, Councillor Garden Cole, you were on before the motion. You can have a little leeway here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just have a couple of questions. That paving reserve that was started in 2009, 13 years ago, we haven't used any of it yet. What is it specifically for? I mean, there must be some criteria to use that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is it's specifically used to pay for local improvements or paving petition local improvements.
Okay. Can't be more definitive than that. I mean, it can't just be used. So it's essentially used for this kind of a project. I guess we've never used it before, but essentially this is the kind of project it would be used for.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's my understanding, but perhaps the Director of Finance can comment on previous projects.
Or through the chair. So before we had the reserve, council did contribute to various paving projects. And what happened was developers were at one point in the early 2000, 2003 or 4, it changed so that the developers would pay for paving. So at that time, we knew that there was a gap, that there were some streets that weren't paved at that time. So council put in place a reserve, which we allocate money each year into. And since then, there hasn't been a petition come forward that was successful that we could contribute the 10% to the project. And and the bylaw speaks to it as well, the F100 local improvement bylaw. But it's also, it changed that it's just for municipal roads. So if it was a provincial road, the bylaw and this particular reserve wouldn't be applicable unless council chose to, change it, and the bylaw would have to change as well.
Okay, so essentially, if I'm getting this right, this reserve was basically put in place to, is that right, to do this kind of a project?
Correct. For any roads that were missed prior to developers having to pave the roads, because we knew that there were some that weren't paved that the residents may want to in the future petition, or council may choose to move forward. And so the reserve is there for that purpose, for paving.
Okay, and secondly, have we ever done a project where we contributed more than 10%?
We have, prior to the amendment to the bylaw, there was a project on McMillan that council chose to contribute 20% to the paving, but there were also gravel costs that they also paid for at that time because it was around the school and the new school. So it was council's wishes to have the paving done as well as the sidewalk at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions. First question is, when was that paving for McMillan done?
So it was around 2006, 2007.
Okay, 2006, 2007, yeah. And
around that time frame.
And I know we get a number of petitions per year for paving of municipal roads. Just unfortunately, none have been successful up to this point, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. The other question I have is, under both cost breakdowns, the residents that live on a provincial road, would they be expected to pay more than 50% of the cost?
Go ahead, Tippy.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, could you repeat that?
So on a provincial road, under petition, it's a 50-50 split between the province and the resident. Under these plans, are the residents who border or who are on a provincial road going to have to pay more than the 50% that they would under an independent petition by themselves?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so instead, it depends on which charge category they would fall into. So instead of doing it by municipal or provincial road for the taxpayer contribution, it's broken down into what charge category you fall into.
See, I have an issue with charging somebody more than what they would normally have to pay, as we are forcing the petitions to move forward. I have no problem in supporting option one. I have no problem tweaking option two. As was reported before, this would drain that reserve by 50%. And if anybody knows anything about paving, $150,000 doesn't go very far when it comes to paving. When you look at just our parking lot at the Lloyd D. Matheson Center is $76,000. So if petitions were being successful, we might get ourselves into some issue over a long stretch of road, even at a 10% cost. But I do have issue with the properties that abut next to a provincial road that are going to be paying more than what they normally would under a normal petition that they would raise asking for it when we are going to implement this onto them. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Rhino. No? Okay, Warden, to the motion.
Yes, I hope it's considered to the motion. It's my take on that road reserve. Yes, and that road reserve is meant to cover the municipal portion of paving petitions. And the municipal portion of these paving petitions is set in the bylaw not to exceed 10%. That's part of the bylaw. It was always my understanding that that road reserve could also be used, and maybe that was just an understanding I had. Someday these roads are going to need to be repaved, and that, you know, some of the funds towards repaving might come from that reserve. It has to come from somewhere. And I don't see going back to the residents when their road needs repaved and making them pay again. I don't know how that would exactly work. But anyway, I expected, quite frankly, some different options here. I'm quite prepared to support option 1. And if it's tweaked so that the provincial people on provincial roads are not paying more than 50%, I'm fine with that. You might have been able to talk me into a hybrid that would have seen anything more than the 10% come from the surplus in the deed transfer tax on a one-time basis for this particular project, but I don't see any option like that. And I think any amendment to the bylaw that would allow even something like that to happen for me would have to keep the 10%, but say something like, you know, up to 10% with up to 25% on an exception basis if authorized by council. So that we would still do as we've always done, up to the 10%, but if it was a project going beyond 10%, it would require this debate and this discussion by council. So those are just my comments. I really, you know, I see benefit in getting these roads paved. Happy to do it under option 1, which is the way we've always done it. And if that has to be tweaked as per Councillor Perry, I'm good with that. I guess I'll just leave it at that. And, you know, if we had had some discussion around surplus of deed transfer, a significant amount is raised in that area, you, in all probability, could have brought me around to that. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Head.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will not be supporting option 1. I prefer option 2. The money is in that reserve to be used for that. It's been sitting there for a number of years, and here's an opportunity to use it. This road gap has been around for years. And the reason why it's been failed because the individual people who live on that road have to pay and pay big for it. And a lot of them don't even have driveways on it just because their house borders on it or their home, their land, they ended up having to pay for a road that they don't have to use. For the rest of the subdivision to pay for it too, that's not fair to them either. And just a reminder that this money in this reserve came from the general tax rate. We discussed this the last time. And my figures could be off, but I believe that half the population in East Hants is in the corridor area and the rest is in the rural part of the area. And I believe that probably close to 60% or somewhere in that area of the general tax rate comes from the corridor area. So I think it's only right that we, you know, take that money where it hasn't been used and use that money to put into this road gap and put this issue to bed. So I will not be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hebb. Councillor Tingley.
Through the chair, yeah, I think Councillor Hebb said a couple of the comments that I was going to mention. At least for the roads in Lance, 3 of them are just connector roads between 2 streets. People don't even live on those streets, and they are going to end up paying to pave them. If those were part of a development now, I would expect that the developer would be required to pave it, and the cost would be spread out through, you know, the entire development. And now at this stage, like to me, it seems to be a common expense, a common problem expense for the whole municipality, and not just for the people that happen to live on the corner of where these connector streets join a couple of main streets where people live. And, you know, with this reserve being established like it was, I think it was established to resolve these problems. It's been sitting there for, you know, a dozen years. The money's there to correct the problem. 10% is absolutely the minimum. I think it would be reasonable to contribute more. I'd like to see option 2, but I'd like to see it resolve one way or the other today.
Councillor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I guess I know that there is a motion on the floor, and I know, sure, it would be nice, but after all these years of debating this topic of the gap roads, would it be an option to go back once again with maybe the deed transfer tax in mind, or tweak it in a different way yet again?
To do that, we would have to defeat this motion and then put another one on the floor for staff to come up with something like that.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the option 2 does in the motion identify that one of the options to pay for the 150,000 would be out of this year's year-end surplus, which if you look at your draft budget, essentially most of that surplus would be coming from your detransfer tax surplus. So one of the options in that motion for funding, not the motion you have on the floor, but the other motion in the report, is to fund the 150,000 from 10% from the reserve, and the remainder from one of the options is the year-end surplus for this year. And the other one was some from the gravel reserve program, understanding that once you have these gravel roads paved, in theory, you would need much less money to manage the gravel road program, although you do still have a number of gravel roads to manage. But there is no magic funding source that we can get to pave these roads. Those are your options that are outlined in that option 2 motion.
Thank you. Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's quite disappointing to hear all the time that 60% come from here and 60% come from there. We have 2 districts in Mount Uniacke. You have 6 districts down there. If you divide it by 6, we're putting more into the municipality now, and the CAO can speak about that. Now, I know the councillor from the rural areas, they're not in a situation to speak, but we are in a situation to speak, and we want equal rights as a corridor areas. I'm getting tired of that. Thank you.
Councillor Rhino.
Yes, gravel road program, taking some from it. I'd be interested in, discussing that. What about the corridor area gas tax? Is that all spoke for? Is that something we can use for that?
Through Mr. Chairman, Council has a pretty extensive plan for those gas tax dollars in the corridor. We planned those out a couple of years ago with a 5- and 10-year plan for those funds.
Cannot that plan be adjusted? I mean, this would be a one-time, like you say, a one-time event. To me, that would be the appropriate where to take that money from. So,
I'm going to stop you there, Councillor. That's a discussion for after we get this motion off the floor. It has no impact on the motion that's there. This would be in a one coming forward. If this is defeated, then all kinds of traction there, sir.
Okay.
Warden Ralston to the motion.
Oh, we'll let it go to the vote and take it from there.
Any other comment on the option 1, the motion that has been made? Not be looking for the question.
Question.
Questions McCall. We'll go to the vote. All in favor signify by raising your hand and saying aye. Keep your hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Six.
Keep your hands up, please. 6. We have 6 in favor. Can I have a show of hands for the nays? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion is a tie, so the motion is lost. Now, Councillor Rhino, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I would be interested, entertained that really should come out of the quarterly gas tax. There may be plans for it. Plans can be adjusted. Plans can be revamped. I would say if you did want to, everyone wanted to contribute more to that project, more than the 10%, then they should be using it out of the gas tax. And to me, gas tax would be appropriate for a road. Thank you.
Through Mr. Chairman, we'd have to check if that was an eligible expenditure under gas tax. It's been so long since I looked at the agreement. We've never used it for roads, so we would have to double check with that.
Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a suggestion that we use the deed transfer tax for this project, and the percentage coming from the corridor would be offset by a percentage going to the fire department in the rural area and the recreation fund in Mount Union, like we did last year.
I don't know who wants to take that one. Is there any comment on that? Would be, is that doable? It is doable. Is that a motion, Councillor Musa?
I'll move, yeah. I don't know if I explained it, but last year, 65% or 60% came from the corridor and 40% would go to work. I think that's fair because the money will go to wherever it came from. Thank you. I'll move that motion.
Okay, so you're moving option 2 with the funding to come from the gas tax?
No.
From the deed transfer tax.
Oh, from the deed transfer tax, and the remainder of the surplus is to go to the UNIAC Recreation Fund and the rural fire departments. Is that what I'm hearing? Or
would you like me to take a stab? I think I understand what you're saying, Councillor Musa. You would like the option 2 with the $150,000 to come from deed transfer tax, and the appropriate percentage as the deed transfer tax is collected to go to the rural area and to the Mount Uniac area, to the recreation fund and the fire department fund.
That's my intent.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it for discussion.
Seconded by the warden, and the warden, you're up to speak. You were on before the seconder, so go ahead.
I'd just like clarification on the amounts, because I was thinking that Councillor Musa
over the
meant
10%.
60% it comes from that 100, but that the remainder of the surplus, I'm not quite sure that I think Councillor Musa meant what the CAO has said. So I'd like some clarification from the CAO as to how much of that deed transfer tax would then go to Mount Uniac and then come to the rural areas. Because last year, I think we split it equally between Mount Uniac and the rural areas. I don't know if that's the intent this time, but that's not what the numbers the CAO is talking about would do.
Okay.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not speaking about the entire deed transfer tax surplus. So if 150,000 was 67% of 250,000, then the remainder of that 250,000 would be divided between the rural area and Mount Uniac. What Councillor Musa said was that it would be by a percentage of where the money was collected. I do believe what we did last year was that difference was split between the two, but that would be up to council to make the clarification.
Whatever council wants, I'm happy either way, so I think it's fair.
Could we have some ideas to the dollars we're talking about?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe, Sue, it's probably going to be, if we can wait till March to find out the actual numbers, but it's probably going to be about 65% corridor.
It's in between 60 and 65 right now for the corridor at the end of December. And it's approximately 15% for the rural area and it's around 24%. And that might not add up perfectly. I'm saying it off the top of my head, but it's about 24% right now in the UNIAC area for the deed transfer. That money that's come in, that's the division as of the end of December. But I mean, that could change. There's still 3 more months of deed transfer revenue to come in, but that's where it is right now. And I also, if for clarification through the chair, are you still intending to take 10% from the paving reserve, and the balance would come from the deed transfer tax up to 150,000? Because it's around 90,000 that we would need if you wanted it to come from the deed transfer.
Is that your intent, Councillor Musa, to take the 10% from the paving reserve as we always have?
I can ask my fellow councillor what they feel about that. Like,
Councillor Perry, you are on next to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, it would be my intention that you would take 10% and then we would top up based on the deed transfer tax. And one of the things we've asked for many times is the breakdown by district of the deed transfer tax. This is my 4th or 5th budget, and I've asked for it every year, and I'm yet to see it. So hopefully we can get that very soon. Because yeah, Mount Uniacke right now is very fortunate. Our districts, there's 2 of us and 24%. 6 make up 60%. So you figure it's 10% for them and it's 12. So it's equal. It's all coming in at the same rate between a lot of the areas. So the biggest thing is making sure that everything is fair and equitable for the municipality and for all the residents there. So I have no problem. Last year, when we did a similar thing to this, Mount Uniacke decided to give extra to the rural fire departments because they were in need of it, because that's what you do, right? People, we are one municipality and we have to support each other. So I think using the deed transfer tax in this way, with the breakdown the way it is going to be, with whatever's remaining, I think it's $90,000, they said, we'll look at whatever the contribution rate was for, when you look at where these districts are and what it is, it's not the entire corridor that is getting the roads paved. It's certain districts. So, I don't see any roads in Grand Lake getting paved, right, in District 1. So they're, when you really look at it, you really have to look at the affected districts, what their percentage of the deed transfer tax was. And that's the most fair and equitable way to do it, because unless you're going to do it all as a corridor and the other districts are okay with being lumped together, that is something that really needs to be thought about, because we are constantly talking about things as rural, Uniacke, and the corridor. But within the corridor, there's different districts too that some of the stuff has no bearing on, and they're footing the bill. So that's just my thoughts going forward. But I'm glad to see this being addressed, and I think this is a good way to get it done, and the fairest way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Rhino.
Yeah, thank you. Just point of clarification on the motion. Okay, so the provincial, the portion would come from the 10% from the paving reserve, correct? And then the remainder would come from the corridor area portion of the deed transfer tax. Am I correct?
Yes.
So, okay, all right. Now, if I don't really, so there'd be nothing from the gravel road program reserve then, where where somebody mentioned, when we pave this, then there'll be excess funds in that because we'll have less gravel roads to look after.
That's correct.
So it's not coming from the gravel road.
To keep it simple, through Mr. Chairman, to keep it simple, you would just keep it from the deed transfer tax dollars.
Mm-hmm.
The only question would be, is the remaining percentage of those dollars allocated equally amongst the 2 other areas, or is it allocated based on the percentage of what was collected in those areas for detransfer tax?
Or as Councillor Perry indicated, do we want to break it down even further and do it by district?
Okay.
Certainly gets a lot more complicated once you start breaking it down.
Councillor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess there's a lot being thrown around here, and I'm going to need some clarification once again on how this changes option 2 from the initial. Does it just change where the money's coming from, but the numbers in the game are still the same?
Yes.
Through you, Madam, Mr. Chairman, it changes where the money's coming from, but it also allocates some dollars to 2 programs that exist. One being the Rural Fire Department Funding Program, and the other being the Community Recreation Rate in Mount Uniac that has its own area rate. So that would allow some dollars to go into that funding pot.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Musa.
Are you going to address the 67% that some people might be paying on provincial roads? I don't think that's fair to keep them paying 67% while they were paying 50% in regular.
Well, through you, I mean, council can make that part of the motion if you'd like. The reason it was put all into one project is because it is one large project, and there's going to be folks who have arguments on every side of this that, you know, they shouldn't be paying because, or they should be paying more, probably not more, but they should be paying less because, and that's why these projects have never gone forward. So that is entirely up to council. We didn't consider that in these 2 options, but it's certainly something we can do. It will increase the cost to all of the other charge holders.
That all, Councillor Musa?
Thank you.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the numbers again, and even on the provincial roads, the amount of money that they will be charged because of the tier 2 and tier 3, plus the input from the municipality and the province, is their overall number higher than what they would have on just if it was just deemed with their road? Because I'm thinking it might actually be, even though it says 60 to 70% or 67%, the total they actually pay might actually be less than the 50% they would have paid under the provincial paving program. So that is just something, if we can clarify that now, then we can actually understand that it is a benefit even to those on the provincial roads. That was something I didn't take consideration when I was looking. I just looked at the pure percentages, but understanding what the cost would be. If I can get clarification on that, that'd be great.
I believe Tippy's looking that up as we speak. There are 100 spreadsheets that back up this.
If I could, Mr. Chair, be elaborated a little bit more. One of the things too, I mean, what we're doing here, the reason why this reserve has not been used for 13 years is the petitions come forward and the cost is too much for people to put through. If we start having the ability, as the warden said, that through special agreements or special things, we can raise that amount, you might actually see this fund be used a lot more. Because I know many paving petitions in my area and other areas, they fail because it's a 90-10 split. So that's probably the reason why the reserve has not been used. Thank you.
Councillor Perry. Okay, seeing no one else, we're looking for a question on the motion. Does everybody understand the motion? Deputy Warden Mitchell's shaking his head no. He's a teacher, so. Yes, would you want to just run through what the motion is, Kim, please? What we're
Sure.
doing here?
So the motion would be as outlined on page 2 of the report. It would authorize staff to proceed with the local improvement, fund 10% of the cost of paving from the paving reserve, and fund the remainder of the 150,000 from the 2021-2022 D-transfer tax surplus, with a proportional amount going to the Mount Uniac Recreation Fund and the Rural Fire Fund. And that staff be directed to draft an amendment to the bylaw, the local improvement bylaw, to enable a contribution greater than 10%, and to include the charges and related charge area, and that the Gap Road project be included in the capital budget for 2022-2026. As well, we would come back to council unless Tippy has the answer, but we would let councillors know by council night whether the provincial folks would be paying more or less with the municipal contribution before the motion's put on the floor.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, we've all heard the motion. Looking for the question.
Question.
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. All in favor, signify by raising your hand and saying aye. And the motion has passed unanimously. Believe it or not, that concludes the business of PAC. I'll be looking for a movement to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Perry, seconded by Councillor Musa. We adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We are scheduled for a short break. Do we wish to break? Do we wish to continue? Do we wish to come back Thursday night? Is there still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more items to deal with? And we're now at 5 after 5.
Can any of these items in parks and recreation, are they very, do they need attention today?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the land issue, we could go in camera very quickly and update council. The playground strategy and the diversification inclusion framework don't need to be done today, but I think if we could fit them into council's agenda, we could do that fairly easily for next Wednesday. And if not, then we would put them first on the agenda next committee day because they've been bumped. The parks one has been bumped. The playground strategy has been bumped at least once due to timing. So the other issue that was left over from corporate residential services, the water utility budget, could certainly be put to a different day, either council or even next committee is fine.
The in-person meeting, we gotta do it now.
So
We do.
really the only issue to deal with is the in-camera issue under Parks, Recreation and Culture, really, and the corporate service issue on
In person.
the meetings.
Yes.
Yeah. Right?
Yes.
All right. So I'll call this meeting of Parks, Recreation and Culture Committee to order. First order of business would be approval of the minutes to December 14, 2021. What is your wish?
So moved.
Moved. A second.
Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Perry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary of mine, motion is carried. All right, our order of business would be land issue. Apparently I have an in-camera thing before that. Councillor Perry.
Move to go in camera
To discuss a land issue.
to discuss a land issue.
We have a seconder, seconded by Councillor Musa. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Contrary of mine. Shirley, can you shut us down? Move into
Yep.
camera?
Just one moment.